Do we have an additional microphone?
I'm ambivalent. Either works for me.
Do we have one more microphone if Jake comes, though? That might be an issue.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, I think we should. Yeah.
And I think, to be honest, one-on-one is a better format than two-on-two.
Yeah, I agree.
We'll do an interview for our podcast after reading this.
What's going on in there anyway?
I don't know.
Obviously. What sort of music that is.
Once I was 7 years old. Can he still ask the questions? I mean, I'm not against it, but like, he's going to know some of this better than me, and then he's going to be more familiar with what the
I guess
the
my
short
only
script
concern,
is.
My only concern is that Trace is
No, there's only one outlet.
in a way in which he's giving his own opinion in the question.
Okay.
So
Well,
then
I mean, I
back
can.
to the- And I believe that you'll try, but it's hard to do. Like,
Okay, well,
just
how about
as a human being, right?
Okay, how about this? Actually, how about this?
I'm sure you're trained to
How about this? Actually, some of this is kind of obvious. So how about I ask the questions, and if I get it like a little wrong, if I get stuck or get a little wrong, he can be like, no, this is what.
And
I
I think Johnny and I are both knowledgeable enough too, where like even if you get stuck with the question,
you'll know
we'll
what's
understand
being
what the
asked.
question. Yeah.
Okay, that's a
Does
good
that make
idea.
sense? Do you agree with that, Johnny? Yeah, that's fine. You meditating or what's going on?
I spend too much time in front of computers.
Yeah, that happens.
So we're still having Jake come on, and then are they?
Maybe not.
I mean, I
don't want to.
All right.
to be constructive and useful.
Well, I think, Johnny, do you agree? Like, even if you stumble over the questions a little bit, you and I will understand.
Yeah, I can probably re-articulate.
Although my only thing is, without Jake, I feel bad that Trace kind of just sitting here, or I don't know if that's.
Well,
she likes Bitcoin. He's okay.
Or,
and if you want to do a second one with like the two of us, and then we can have somebody else.
I mean, Jake should come.
Be mindful of how often you.
And we should start soon though, because like I'm sorry I was a little bit late though too, because I have that hard deadline. I have like 4 people waiting to
Just give me a 5-second heads up so I can hit the record button on my end. Otherwise, I'm ready.
Do we need to put these things on?
yeah, to the extent that we have enough.
Yeah, there should be enough.
I'm not trying to be a stickler on this, but I'd like to be like just 2 people debating, like one on my side and one on the other side, or one on myself and Johnny is what I'm asking for. One moderator, not 2.
And no trading off. I mean,
I prefer not, because trading off is hard to do when people still wind up with even time. And I'm more than happy to do it round 2 with you tomorrow, though.
Yeah, sure.
Or even later tonight. So.
Okay. Do we have enough micro or headphones?
Yeah.
Do I have one? This is
there's
Trace's.
another one right there.
Oh, that's right.
I think Trace is your.
Or actually, let me get this one. You use the red ones because this will be closer to me.
I'm being censored.
Yeah, I've told you I'll do this round 2.
I'm being censored.
John, I keep forgetting. Who do you work for? What's the name of the company? I should know this.
I work for Blockstream, but
Blockstream.
I'm here representing myself.
Okay, let's just do that. Let's just do that.
Oh, we should say that you're here representing yourself and employed by Blockstream. That's fair. So and I'm here representing myself.
It does say Blockstream's JD, so that's okay.
JD is in junior developer, or
No.
Do you have a Twitter?
All right.
I don't. Oh, I just uploaded something.
What the hell happened?
The power popped out.
Closer because these headphones are not long enough for me to sit.
And John Dilley is disqualified. No, I'm just kidding.
DQ.
All right. Are you gonna do intro?
Yeah.
Anything? Okay.
Can you scoot down?
Yeah.
Can you two scoot down? Because then I'll be closer.
Are you calling me fat?
Me and Johnny, so Jake
yes.
gets to listen in.
Well, you're right. I am. So.
Or if people want to
And
hear
take
like
the
somebody
king's
other than me
logo
tomorrow,
off
though too.
Thank
maybe
you.
Okay.
Recognizing my kingship. Thank you.
All right, are we ready here?
Yeah, I might.
And I'm setting a timer.
I'm gonna hold on.
Timer for when I need to leave.
Ready?
Not for
Yeah.
the debate time.
Welcome to the Crypto Show on 89.1 FM, the Logos Radio Network. We're coming to you live from the real heart of the resistance, the most dangerous studio on the planet. At Defense Distributed, home of the Ghost Gunner and the Crypto D&D Studio, where we're printing and milling out freedom, undermining the banks and the man, but having some fun while we do it.
Chief, mate, what do you want to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
The Pinky and the Brain, yes, Pinky and the Brain. One is a genius, the other's insane. They're laboratory mice, the genes have been sliced. They're Pinky and the Brain.
Rodent Orson Welles with macrocephaly, but it worked. And that was the brain and his sidekick Pinky. Welcome to the Crypto Show, guys. It is Monday, the 27th of February, 2017. We are coming to you from Anarchapulco in the heart of southern Mexico, in Acapulco, Mexico, for the 3rd annual Anarchapulco Conference. We are joined by some illustrious guests, and actually our biggest audience ever, and our biggest audience, whether live or over the airwaves. So there must be like 5 people out there. So pretty huge. We're very excited by this. But we're going to have a sort of separate but follow-up discussion about the future of Bitcoin, and specifically with respect to the block size issue that's been going on for quite some time, and the two opposing, if you will, sides, Segregated Witness and Bitcoin Unlimited. And for this debate, we have, of course, Roger Ver. On
our champion, Roger.
Woo-hoo! Oh, wait. I can't do that. It's going to make me sound biased. I'm going to woot for you, too, though. We also have John Dilley. Woo-hoo! Representing Segregated Witness. And sitting in, kind of watching, is Trace Mayer. And, of course, another illustrious Bitcoiner, early adopter and investor and proselytizer like Roger Ver for Bitcoin. And, in fact, Trace Mayer is responsible for the questions.
He's the matchmaker today.
And he's the matchmaker.
Cupid.
Oh, Cupid, draw back your bow. Thank you, Trace, for that. And some really good, hard-hitting questions. Now, these are questions he wrote down, so if I don't quite get them right, of course, people are going to step in and correct me, whether that's Trace or these two guys. So I guess let's get right to it. Let's see. Now, I guess I'll address this to you to start off with, Roger. The idea of economic consensus, I think, as opposed to, let's say, mining consensus or technical consensus within the community. What is? How do those relate to each other? How do those complement or compete with each other? Am I asking this question correctly?
Yeah, I mean, like Roger was talking about the economic code, like what is Bitcoin? So maybe you can address that.
There you go.
So, Bitcoin's been around for about 8 years now. I've been involved for a little over 6 of those years. And the reason I was attracted to Bitcoin was because of the underlying economic code of Bitcoin. And that was irreversible, instant, peer-to-peer payments worldwide at very, very low cost. And that the ability of Bitcoin to do that today is being undermined. Bitcoin transactions cost more money than ever before to do. The transaction times are longer than ever before. It takes sometimes hours or even days, or sometimes not at all, for transactions to be confirmed in blocks. They're easier to be double spent than ever before. This is undermining the economic code of Bitcoin that made Bitcoin the success that it is today. And a group of people that are involved in Bitcoin think that it's just fine that Bitcoin fees are higher than ever before. They think it's just fine that Bitcoin confirmation times are longer than ever before. They think it's just fine that it's easy to double spend Bitcoin transactions. And this is a giant, giant, giant problem for the underlying economic code of Bitcoin that led Bitcoin to go from being basically nobody using it to now millions of people around the world. And if that underlying economic code of Bitcoin is changed, that's every bit as dangerous to the future of Bitcoin as changing the software code of Bitcoin. If you break the software code of Bitcoin, Bitcoin is broken. If you change the economic code of Bitcoin, Bitcoin will be broken and people will start to use something else. And as the earliest investor in the entire world in the Bitcoin ecosystem, and as a large holder of Bitcoins, and as the CEO of Bitcoin.com, I am terrified about the economic code of Bitcoin being changed.
Okay, excellent. Well, I certainly don't doubt that there are many people who are complacent with what's going on, as you say, but surely there are people on the Segregated Witness side or just in general who aren't happy with where we're at either. So I don't know, John, how would you respond to what he just said?
I mean, first I'm going to speak to the fact that there's a bit of a mischaracterization of Bitcoin in the way Roger thinks about it. You cannot have an instant transaction in Bitcoin. Fundamentally, in order for a transaction to have settled or confirmed, requires work. So, and the characterization of Bitcoin as being easier to double spend or easier to reverse or transactions not confirming rapidly is a misconception. You cannot assume that a transaction that is zero confirmation or waiting in the mempool is necessarily going to be confirmed ever. It is a viable opportunity. Like miners could choose to make empty blocks for the rest of all time, and that is a valid use of mining power. Now, obviously, they're not economically incentivized to do that. However, the characterization that a Bitcoin transaction that is just in the mempool is confirmed or a valid Bitcoin transaction is not true. It is not valid until it is confirmed. So I would speak to that first. Second off, I would speak to the fact that
can I address that point, or how do we want to go for the back and forth?
That's fine. You can address that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Maybe we'll do our best to each stick to one specific topic at a time.
That might be a good idea, so it doesn't get muddled. So address that, and he'll have his second point. Go ahead,
so
Roger.
What Johnny said there, louder. And just because I'm talking louder doesn't mean that my argument is more correct.
I'm picking you up from that mic. That's why.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll talk louder towards that mic as well. So anyhow, I think what Johnny just said is actually a fantastic example of the different way of viewing Bitcoin of a lot of people that are involved in Bitcoin in the Bitcoin core team. They view unconfirmed transactions as basically not transactions at all. And it's not either they're confirmed or they're not, they're safe or they're not. It's a sliding scale where with unconfirmed transactions, you can have it where it's super easy to double spend at any time until it's included in a block, or you can have it where you know pretty darn for sure that it's very, 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 very likely to be included in the next block. And for someone who uses Bitcoin for actual payments, you want to make sure that you know with as much likelihood as you possibly can that transaction is going to be included in the next block. So it's not like a binary option of either it's confirmed or it's not. There's a sliding scale in regards to the amount of safety or the likelihood of the transaction being included in the next block. And as Bitcoin users wanting to make Bitcoin as useful as we possibly can to people around the world, we want to make it so that it's as trustworthy as we possibly can to know that an unconfirmed transaction is going to be included in the next block. And we understand it's not included. But
I know, but do you agree that it's an unsafe practice to assume that an unconfirmed transaction is an actual Bitcoin transaction?
Absolutely not. Businesses do it every single day. I've accepted Bitcoin transactions today for more than $20,000 each with zero confirmations.
Would you accept a zero confirmation $500,000 transaction?
The software might. So it depends on the circumstances.
But like you're talking about the characteristics of now the incentives of the system don't hold up under those conditions. Like if you're accepting unconfirmed $500,000 transaction, there are incentives for miners and strategic action to reverse that payment and that person who paid you with an unconfirmed transaction to pay themselves.
So by making Bitcoin transactions easily reversible, you're making the incentive even larger.
The properties of the system have always allowed for double spending. Always.
But the properties of the system much more recently have been altered to make it much easier to double spend transactions.
How so?
In the early days of Bitcoin, the general rule was called first seen, first safe, which meant the first transaction that was viewed on the network was the one that was due to be included in the next block.
That assumes miners are not being strategic.
And as someone who's running a mining pool and heavily involved in mining, and I did a bunch of mining back in 2012 myself in my own warehouse, miners are mining a Bitcoin. Miners want Bitcoin to be worth as much as they possibly can because that's the product that they're mining. So they're incentivized to make Bitcoin as trustworthy and as reliable and safe as they possibly can because that increases the value of the product that they're mining.
While you might be able to say that about certain miners, you cannot say that about all people who can become miners. That is strictly not how the system works.
Guys, so it's not lost in the shuffle for our audience. Do clarify why this is such an important thing with respect to this debate, in case it's not clear.
Well, the fundamental characteristic of Bitcoin is that work, primarily the conversion of electricity into security, is what provides Bitcoin a substantial amount of its characteristic value. And you do not get that, you don't get components of that value by just putting something in the mempool.
So can I ask you to clarify, you're saying that the reason Bitcoin is valuable is because people did work and converted electricity into Bitcoin?
One of the characteristics of its value, yes.
Can you say what you think the other reasons Bitcoin is valuable?
I think Bitcoin is a valuable system from many perspectives because of one, its robust and consistent focus on security as a tenet, and two, its robust and consistent censorship-resistant practice. Other characteristics are obviously its ability to make border-border, cross-border payments,
so why does Bitcoin have a value, I guess is what I'm asking. Why do you think Bitcoin is valuable?
I mean, all of those things. It's the fact that it's a deflationary storage of value. It's the fact that it can pay people border-to-border. It can do machine-to-machine payments. There's a whole number of characteristics, including the fact that proof of work happens to drive the chain forward, regardless of whether or not who controls that proof of work.
So if I can say why I think Bitcoin's valuable, if that's okay. So, and I think you kind of tap danced around it, but there's a really, really easy and simple way to say why Bitcoin is valuable. Bitcoin is valuable because it's useful and because it's scarce. And anything that's useful and is scarce has value. And so our job, if we want Bitcoin to be valuable and have the price of Bitcoin go up, we need to make Bitcoin as useful as we possibly can. And by undermining the ability of Bitcoin transactions to be accepted as safe enough without having been confirmed in the block, that's undermining the usefulness of Bitcoin, and that's undermining the value of Bitcoin. And as anybody who uses Bitcoin for payments knows, you want to be able to accept Bitcoin without having it been confirmed in a block as safe enough.
You're entitled to do that, but you are trusting the person you are accepting a zero confirmation payment from explicitly.
So why have a blockchain? Why? Do you want to elaborate on that question?
Yeah, I mean, if we're dealing with zero confirmation transactions and asserting that it's safe to receive them, like, why have a blockchain at all, Roger?
A zero confirmation transaction is not as safe as one that's included in the blockchain. So of course we want a blockchain so we have this irreversible ledger for the end of time to keep track of who owns what on the Bitcoin blockchain. But that doesn't mean that we should make it so that confirmations or Bitcoin transactions that haven't been confirmed can be altered and changed at any time whatsoever. And I hear so many people on the other side of the scaling debate think that it's perfectly okay to allow Bitcoin transactions to be double spent at any point right until they're included in a block. And that's insanity for anybody that's actually using Bitcoin for payments in commerce.
It's a fundamental characteristic of the system.
But it's not a binary option. It's a sliding scale. So either unconfirmed transactions can be pretty darn safe, or they can be instantly
What does
reversible
pretty darn safe mean?
Pretty darn safe means safe enough to use in most instances.
You can reorg the network back several blocks and undo something. Like let alone something that is just in the mempool.
Are you disagreeing with me that it's not a sliding scale? You think it's binary, yes or no?
I think you have some statistical assurances by including a high fee paying transaction such that miners are incentivized economically to include it in the next block, but that does not give you any stable assurances with regards to its state in the ledger. It's not in the ledger yet.
Okay, so you're saying that we shouldn't make any attempt whatsoever to make unconfirmed Bitcoin transactions as safe as we possibly can?
I think that that's a characteristic of the businesses or the individuals who have different trust characteristics than those who are solely utilizing proof of work as their trust characteristic.
So I can tell you every single person that's using Bitcoin for payments wants zero confirmation transactions to be as safe as possible.
So you like Lightning then?
I love Lightning, sure.
Okay.
Well, let me just chime in. For what I know, it does seem like there's a sliding scale in the sense of there's a different risk assessment based on individual circumstances. So, like, yes, if it's a $5 transaction, the risk of a reversal is probably slim. A $500,000 transaction is, as even John stated, there's some risk of it because there's a huge incentive behind it. I mean, so do we know statistics behind any actual reversals or double spends?
Someone would know better than me, but reorganizations are a fundamental property of a proof of work blockchain because miners are not well aligned necessarily in their incentives. Some miners may be willing to selfishly mine, other miners may be willing to selectively exclude blocks of a different miner. As a result, the state or the assurance you have about the characterization of your payment requires that you have an amount of depth behind the work of the system. The mempool is not an assurance about the mempool is an assurance about the potentiation of your transaction to get into Bitcoin. It is not an assurance about your transaction ever being in Bitcoin. Period. That is the necessary characteristic of this system.
So I don't think I really disagreed with anything you said there, but I think where we do disagree is I'm saying that we should work to actively make unconfirmed transactions as likely and safe as we possibly can to be confirmed in the next block so that merchants can accept them basically instantly. And I hear that you're saying we shouldn't even bother to try to do that because it's not part of the system or something.
I would state that what you're looking for is something that has much more of the topicological characteristics of Lightning, whereby users have relationships that are known, bounded relationships that have capital in them or pre-attested in them between them and their merchants or them and their payees, and as a result they can do instantaneous confirmations between those two people as a result of having a Lightning relationship.
So the short version of what you're saying is that for Bitcoin on-chain transactions, so we shouldn't even try to make them as safe as we can?
You can from a business or application logic layer perspective, but from a protocol layer perspective, the characteristics of the system don't allow you to make it safer.
That's simply not true. They're less safe now than they ever were before.
You've always been able to double spend, and you've always been able to use the system.
I can explain why. So previously, up until maybe 6 months ago, pretty much every single transaction was included in the very next block. So you had about a 10-minute window in which the transactions could be diverted or double spent or had something happen. Now that the blocks are all full all the time, instead of having a 10-minute window in which a transaction could be double spent, you now have hours or even days long double windows. So it went from maybe being 10 minutes worth of time where it could be double spent to now hours and hours. So that's a real world example that's indisputable, which transactions are now less safe than they used to be.
So I could actually argue that as a result of the Poisson distribution, which is the means by which blocks are found, which is on 10 minutes on average, you actually don't have an assurance. Sometimes you'll go an hour without a block being found.
But the average confirmation time for Bitcoin transactions today is longer than it was previously, which means the amount of time that they could potentially be double spent today is longer than it was previously, which means the ability to double spend transactions today is easier than it was previously because you have a longer period of time to do it for each transaction.
So we could go on forever on this.
And that's not necessarily true. As a function of the fact that reorganizations can occur at any time, you don't have assurances.
We could go on forever on this topic. I feel like we should move on. I mean, this needs further exploration, obviously, but I think we're kind of at an impasse. So why don't we have a closing statement on the topic from each of you, relatively brief, and we'll move on to the next question. John, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I would state that I understand Roger's business and person to person or person to peer or person to another
entity
client.
To entity,
yeah, entity to entity. It's an app, but he's talking about an application or a business logic question, and he's trying to. It's a layer violation. That's how we would describe it in the technical parlance. He's talking about applying characteristics that need to be done on a business to business or a person to on a person to their client relationship, where he wants a level of trust between those two parties about the confirmation of a coin that he cannot get as a result of the characteristics of the system, unless you happen to have something like a payment channel relationship with that party already. So it sounds like the exact use case you want for your transactions or for people that are utilizing Bitcoin could easily come from something like the Lightning Network. And that's actually great. I actually think that we actually have
I think we agree on most of that.
Yeah, that's
We're both
exciting.
looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think the fact that the Lightning Network addresses those concerns completely is something that is very powerful. I think that's very powerful.
Okay, any additional words from you?
Absolutely. I'd like to point out, as a user of Bitcoin for 6 years, objectively speaking, Bitcoin, the network itself, is much, much, much more dangerous to use and much less reliable than it was before. And that's a direct result, and I explained exactly why the reason it is. Bitcoin transactions are easier to be double spent than ever before. They take longer to be confirmed than ever before. It's a big, big, big problem for people that are using Bitcoin in commerce. And people using Bitcoin in commerce is the reason Bitcoin has value today. It's the reason there's all this venture capital funds investing in the Bitcoin space. There's the reason that there's all these Bitcoin conferences around the world is because people are using Bitcoin for payments. And if Bitcoin becomes less useful for payments and more expensive and less safe to use, fewer people will be using Bitcoin.
I actually would state that that's a little bit, that conversation requires a little bit more nuance.
Okay.
The velocity of money is not necessarily the only characteristic that drives value of money. In Bitcoin's case, it's because it's a deflationary store of value in the context of the fact that it's not something that is easily politically manipulatable or easily undermined. So I think that there is, to a point, a relationship between the velocity of the money, as you state, the commerce that's underlying it, and Bitcoin's price and Bitcoin's value. But ultimately, I would state that a larger component of it is the fact that as a storage of value, it is unlike any other asset that's ever existed.
All right. Well, interesting stuff. Let's move on.
If I can make one final
really quick, Roger.
So the reason Bitcoin has value is because of the people who save it, not because of the people who spend it. And the reason people save it is because they think they'll be able to spend it in the future. But it's the savers of Bitcoin that give it value, not the spenders of Bitcoin.
All right. Well, let's move on. So Segregated Witness is a soft fork change to the network, whereas Bitcoin Unlimited would be a hard fork. You'd have a split in Bitcoin. I guess the question is, what is the kind of moral hazard to be had with a hard fork?
I actually think we should talk about let's talk about the characteristics of the two proposed changes or upgrades or whatever.
As a background, that's a good idea.
And then I think traces more the moral hazard mark on that paper more has to do with the moral hazard behind forking itself, not necessarily the
specific fork.
Yeah, no,
okay,
the
gotcha.
fork. And I can talk to both systems. I know both upgrades, but if you so Segregated Witness is.
Although if I can have 2 seconds,
that's fine.
I'd like to point out that a hard fork is just a euphemism for a protocol upgrade. So every time you hear someone saying hard fork, just think of it as being a protocol upgrade, and then it doesn't sound nearly as scary.
It's a backwards incompatible protocol upgrade. That is a important distinction, whereas a soft fork is backwards compatible.
Very true.
So that we can get to that in a second. I'll talk about the two upgrades first. So the Segregated Witness is an amazing innovation by a number of core developers, which basically moves I'll talk first. A Bitcoin transaction or a Bitcoin block includes transactions themselves, which is TXIDs, the UTXO, and the scripts and signatures associated with those components. Segregated Witness is the idea that we can move the signature information to what's the specific is the Merkle root of the Coinbase, but we can move it into a separate kind of caboose for a normal block, and as a result, we can get a substantial amount of more space in the transaction for more transactions. I think right now, if Segregated Witness shipped, it would be 130% on average capacity increase to Bitcoin,
assuming the wallets adopted it. In the format of their transactions.
Yes, and we have not almost universal, but close. We have a large majority of wallets at this point have adopted it. Blockchain.info has signaled that they're ready.
It's every wallet's job to be ready for wherever the network heads.
Yes,
so
exactly.
They'll be ready for that, and they would be ready for Bitcoin Unlimited too.
We can get to that in a second. So Segregated Witness enables a number of other interesting bug fixes for Bitcoin as well as a result of changing some components for Segregated Witness transactions. It solves something called transaction malleability or external transaction malleability, which is basically that a miner or an external party can malleate that TXID for a transaction. And as a result, it makes applications or business logic that attempt to reference a transaction much more. The infrastructure required is much higher. It's a higher order, so it's much more complicated. It also allows something that's very powerful for hardware wallets called signature covers value. And signature cover value basically means that when a wallet signs for a transaction, it also includes information about the amount it's signing for. So it simplifies, for example, the hardware process. So it makes like both Trezor, Ledger, KeepKey, and a number of the other hardware wallet companies are all very excited about Segregated Witness because it enables them to do much more powerful things with their hardware wallets, like notarization and things like that, without a lot of infrastructure required in the hardware wallet itself. It changes a characteristic of classic Bitcoin transactions, which is that they have quadratic scaling of signature hash operations, and it changes that into a linear scaling of signature hash operations. And this is part of the reason why when Gavin originally proposed an 8 megabyte block or even a 2 megabyte block with classic Bitcoin transactions, there were concerns about the characteristics of those blocks. Because,
is this linear scaling easier on the network?
Yes. So there's something called an attack block. And an attack block is essentially you can compose a block with certain kinds of transactions, scripts, and signature sets such that it takes a substantial amount of time to validate. Okay. So I think with a 1 megabyte Bitcoin block, you can make an attack block that takes like 39 seconds to validate, which is a long time from a miner's perspective. At a 2 megabyte block, I think Phantom Circuit or Sergio Lerner demonstrated that you could do one that took as much as just 14 minutes to validate.
Oh wow!
So you can see that there's potential under those kinds of conditions for miners to have strategic action that disenfranchises smaller miners and as a result compresses the decentralization network.
Yeah.
Yes. There's a number of other nice componentries to Segregated Witness as well. Some of them slip my mind, but it's essentially a number of bug fixes and technical debt cleanup for the network.
So it's more than just block size, addressing the block size.
The capacity increase happens to be thanks to Luke Jr. The capacity increase happened to be something we didn't know we could do as a soft fork, and we happened to figure out that we could actually do it as a soft fork, and that was a nice bonus to Segregated Witness as an upgrade.
Okay, and do you want to explain?
And then I'll explain Bitcoin Unlimited. So Bitcoin Unlimited is
actually. Can I add one comment?
Please.
I'd actually like to compliment you. I think you did a fantastic job of explaining Segregated Witness, and I think I agree with just about everything you said there in regards to that. So fantastic job.
Thank you.
Describing that.
Okay.
Excellent.
Bitcoin Unlimited is the argument that miners are already in control of the system, so why don't we just give them control of the block size as well? Or other, you can argue that you can also ultimately give them control of selective components across the protocol, and as a result of their short, medium, and long-term incentivization, they'll do what's best for the network because it's what's best for themselves.
Now, real quick on that, does that imply that there's any sort of potential adversarial relationship between miners and Bitcoin Core?
There already is a substantial. So there's a substantial problem with this argument, but let me explain. Let me explain how it works first. Is essentially they change the fixed construct in Bitcoin Core or the other Bitcoin and Bitcoin D and all these LibBitcoin and all the other compatible protocols. They change a fixed constant into a two-part constant, which is a excessive block size and an acceptance depth. And the idea being that you see a block that is, let's say you're comfortable accepting 2 megabyte blocks. And anything above 2 megabytes, your node's just going to kill itself. It just can't handle the validation or whatever the chain tip is. It just won't be able to handle it. So you put, I'm going to accept blocks up to 2 megabyte in size, and your node will basically attempt to relay and will accept as valid blocks that include up to that 2 megabyte in size. And then you have something called acceptance depth, which is that in the event that you see a block larger than that size for a period of time, you will revert that's larger than the 2 megabytes in this case, you will revert your excessive block size to whatever the size of that block was that you saw. So a really, really easy example, you've set it to 2 megabytes, you see a bunch of 2 megabyte blocks for a while, then you see a 2.1 megabyte block, you mark it as invalid, but that chain ends up continuing for a period of time. If that period of time it continues for is longer than your quote-unquote acceptance depth, you will revert your excessive block size to the maximum size of that new chain. So it's a radical change to the way in which consensus works, because consensus now becomes, Peter Ark calls it emergent consensus, but essentially you have to have this bounded statistical problem where everyone's trying to figure out what everyone's relative excessive block size to acceptance depth functions are and try to drive the chain forward with this kind of influx, kind of almost quantum position. And as a result, it makes it a lot more difficult for us to come to consensus about the characteristics of the system. B, it encourages certain types and kinds of selfish mining. And C, it ultimately will tend towards a further centralization of the network because it empowers large miners at the expense of smaller miners.
Could it increase the likelihood for double spending or any other kind of...
I would state that any characteristic change to Bitcoin that empowers large miners at the cost of small miners or empowers certain nodes at the cost of other nodes implicitly hurts the decentralization of Bitcoin.
So at some point I'd like the chance to...
Sorry, I was just
no problem.
I was trying to
just wanted to make sure I did get a chance.
No, go ahead,
please.
And thank you for the excellent description of Segregated Witness, and thank you for a pretty good description of Bitcoin Unlimited. Although I could tell we have a little bit different opinions on there, but what I'd like to point out, like all the things that you talked about, Segregated Witness solving and the improvements that it makes, those are all good things to have done, and none of them are urgent. That what's really urgent for Bitcoin right now today is to get the transaction can cost more than $10 each sometimes. $10, $20, $30, $50 each for a single Bitcoin transaction is not uncommon today. Bitcoin transactions waiting for hours and hours to be confirmed in the next block is common today. That was never, ever, ever the case until very, very recently when the blocks became full. So Segregated Witness solves some problems that will be nice to be solved but aren't urgent at all. Bitcoin Unlimited solves the nightmare of a user experience that people that are having Bitcoin or using Bitcoin for commerce today are having. It makes it so your Bitcoin transactions are going to be confirmed in a timely manner and for a reasonable price, and the risk of double spending is going to go down. So Bitcoin Unlimited solves the problems that the Bitcoin network is experiencing today. Segregated Witness solves some problems, yeah, but those problems aren't urgent. The problems that we're having today are with Bitcoin transactions taking forever to get confirmed and costing a fortune.
If it solves them at the cost of decentralization and censorship resistance, it is not a cost the system should be willing to bear.
And I completely disagree that it would cost them at those costs and or solve them at those costs. And it's worth pointing out, like lots and lots of people seem to be afraid that, if it takes, if blocks are bigger, it's going to take a more expensive computer to run a full node. That's true. But today, maybe we have, 10, 20, maybe even 30 million people around the world interested in using Bitcoin. If we allow Bitcoin to be used by billions of people around the world, we're going to have a lot more people using Bitcoin, which means there's a much bigger base of people to run full nodes from, and there's a whole lot more social resistance against governments trying to ban Bitcoin or enforce AML or KYC policies upon Bitcoin. If 1 billion plus people are using Bitcoin around the world and government says, oh, we want you to register every transaction with us, and people know how easy it is to do a Bitcoin transaction without their government's permission, people are going to do it anyhow. Or if government tries to demonize Bitcoin by saying it's only used for drug dealers and child pornographers, but people are using Bitcoin to buy their Starbucks coffee, people are going to laugh at the government when they say that. Whereas if Bitcoin's limited to a small number of people, when government tries to demonize Bitcoin in that way, people might believe it. And that's a really, really big fear for Bitcoin. And if I can add a little bit more there, I've been involved for 6 years with Bitcoin. My initial strategy when I got involved was I knew governments weren't going to like Bitcoin. And we're here at Anarchapulco, right? A big room full of people that probably don't like governments too much. My strategy to protect Bitcoin from governments was to grow it as fast as we possibly can, as quickly as we can, because in addition to having protection from government by having this distributed architecture, you also can have protection from government by having mass adoption. The more people that use Bitcoin, the safer it is from government intervention.
All right, John, respond, and then I want to transition to the second part of what this topic was, which was the moral hazard inherent in fork.
Okay, so there's a couple of points here, and I think Roger articulates the concerns he has about the need for more users as a result of it becoming inherently, as a result of more users, more censorship resistant. I'm going to speak to two of those points first. So the first one is that there's an inherent problem in the argument that more people means more nodes. Primarily, we can see this as objectively false. Over the last 8 years of Bitcoin, we went from 60,000 nodes to I think 5,800 today. So we've actually had a dramatic decline in the number of nodes because the actual cost to run a node is increasing. There are bandwidth and throughput constraints a lot of places of the world. It takes, in some cases, 400, 500, 1,000 gigabytes a month to run an actual node. Just a throughput turnover as a result of you seeding blocks, as a result of you seeding the mempool. And those costs are not going to go down. If Bitcoin has demand, which it does, and that's a great thing, it's fantastic. The demand for Bitcoin will continue to go up. There's another component to this, to Roger's argument that has a bit of a misconception as well. There's unbounded demand for free storage, unbounded demand for free transactions. In a system that has the characteristics of Bitcoin Unlimited, the incentives are increasingly for large miners to attempt to push that block size as high as it can go as a result of trying to meet that unbounded demand. And now you as Joe user, or you as Joe business, who's maybe marginally profitable, are going to be facing an increasingly higher cost to run a full node. And the only assurances you have in Bitcoin that you are actually utilizing Bitcoin is if you are validating your transactions in real time. Otherwise, you are trusting someone else, and if you're trusting someone else, you're not getting, or you may be getting some of the characteristics of Bitcoin as the asset class, but you're not getting Bitcoin, the characteristics of Bitcoin as the cryptographically verifying signature system. So the properties.
Are you arguing that people that use a client on their phone aren't using Bitcoin?
Light clients are explicitly trusting application layer and business logic layers to utilize to be on their behalf.
So are you saying that that's not using Bitcoin? Or?
You are utilizing Bitcoin, the asset, and you may be utilizing some aspects of it, but you're explicitly trusting a company to A, not double spend you, or B, not Sybil attack you off the network, and C, you're explicitly trusting them to not be spying on your transactions, to be validating it on the one true chain. There's a whole bunch of characteristics that by using a light client you're not gaining.
Do you use a light client on your own phone?
I have a Trezor and a core node. That's pretty
so much. You don't have a Bitcoin wallet on your phone?
I think I have one for the first time recently. I'm more of a holder than I am a spender of Bitcoin.
Can I ask how often do you actually spend or use Bitcoin?
I used it in a poker game recently, I think. So I mean, I'm probably a 10 time a year, or maybe a 20 time a year, but
once a month ballpark.
I mean, like personally, but from my perspective, Bitcoin is the most sound money in the entire world. Why would you ever spend it? You should be holding as much Bitcoin as possible, and it's by definition the perfect deflationary asset. It has a fixed supply and a permanent increasing demand and a decrease in its inflation characteristics.
I think you're wrong when you think it has a permanent increasing demand. If something else comes along that's more useful than Bitcoin, people are going to use that.
Can you give me an example of what you mean by something else that comes along that's more useful?
Sure. There's 1,001 other competing cryptocurrencies.
How many of them have like really good developers?
I'm sure lots of them have good developers. And here's the thing.
Can you name one?
Sure. I think Monero has an interesting development team.
Fluffy Pony's a pretty good guy. And I think they might have 6 or 7 developers.
Okay.
How many does Bitcoin Core have?
You can tell me, you're part of it.
I think it's about 115 or 120 contributors.
Okay. And the reason why is because Bitcoin has the biggest network effect. But I hear lots and lots of things coming from developers like yourself who admittedly use Bitcoin about once a month. I use Bitcoin more times than I can count every single day. I've already sent more than $100,000 in Bitcoin transactions today.
I know.
As part of my business, Bitcoin is becoming less and less useful every single day because of the network congestion. And if people like me, they're using Bitcoin for commerce and saving Bitcoins, I'm a saver too. I have a large pile of Bitcoins. If I get fed up with the high fees and easiness of double spending on Bitcoin network and start using something else, a bunch of other merchants are, Bitcoin will lose its network effect. People are going to use something else. And these 150 Bitcoin Core developers are going to start working on something else because it's no fun to work on something that nobody's using. And that's a real possibility with Bitcoin. That's how serious the problem is with Bitcoin.
I know, and I would state, and I think that this addresses your concerns almost entirely, is that what you're asking for as someone who has a lot of high throughput, small value transactions for your large.
And I do some big ones too.
For your large value transactions, you may be interested in the trust topology of a multi-confirmation Bitcoin transaction. You're like that's a legitimate, valid use case of the Bitcoin network. But for your small value transactions, like we just bought a sandwich at a vegan shop. That's exactly what the Lightning Network is for.
Looking forward to it. I think we're both looking forward to it.
I know, but like the point being is that if Segregated Witness gets over the bar and it gets activated, you address the throughput constraints problems that you're talking about.
Lightning Network is
so let's have some final thoughts on this topic, and then we'll move on to the next one.
And I have about 10 minutes left before I have to run.
Oh, okay.
I have a card.
All the more reason for us to do that. Well, actually, let's just go on to the next one then, since that was a pretty long discussion. So the Bitcoin Core roadmap. Tell us about that, John. Roger, respond. Essentially, what comes after SegWit? Because it seems that it's only a temporary stopgap solution with respect to the block size, not with respect to other things.
Well, it's a cleanup of a lot of technical debt in the way the system operates by enabling this new transaction type. But my memory came back to me. Another component of it is that it enables script extensions to be much easier in Bitcoin. So I hear Roger's concerns. I think fungibility in Bitcoin is increasingly a concern.
Completely agreed.
I think throughput is definitely something we need to be expanding upon, and I think that ultimately privacy is also something as well, but less so than I think components like reasonable smart contracting evolution and stuff like that. So part of the Bitcoin Core roadmap, after we have Segregated Witness, it enables things that are very powerful. Like, for example, the Schnorr signatures, masked, aggregated signatures, Mimblewimble, Tumblebit, and ultimately the Lightning Network. I think all of these things in combination, each of them individually give us things like further throughput, further capacity increase on-chain, changes to the dynamics of, for example, coin joins or services that help you gain more privacy as a Bitcoin user, regardless of your use case of the Bitcoin network. These are all things that we have in mind as possible evolutions of the Bitcoin network. And in order to roll them out, require that we come together behind a specific solution, and we don't see things like this coming out from the Bitcoin Unlimited team. We do, because fundamentally, unless I'm mistaken, Bitcoin Unlimited doesn't support Segregated Witness right now. There's no consensus amongst your group of 4 or 6 developers that there needs to be
more than that.
I think the list is 8. I think 8
I think there's even more than that, but okay.
Okay, well, there's no consensus that this type of evolution, which is making Bitcoin smarter, making Bitcoin more fungible, making Bitcoin more scriptable, more smarter, essentially smarter and leaner Bitcoin. It's not. We don't see that coming out of the hard fork at all costs now, because Bitcoin needs more throughput team. We need to. The characteristics that make Bitcoin valuable are that it retains its characteristics as a robust, secure at all costs, censorship-resistant machine. And hurting the decentralization of the network by further empowering miners, by handing consensus over to them, is not in the best interest of Bitcoiners.
So I know part of what you're saying is that like the block size is not everything, that there's other aspects of it that are going to make Bitcoin robust or not. But nonetheless, specifically since that's kind of part of the debate, with the effective block size of segregated witness, something in like 3 megabytes or something, from what I've heard, I could be wrong. Where do you go from there? Now that's where the Lightning Network comes in. And explain that and how that's going to.
I want to give Roger a chance to speak, but So Schnorr gives us another 20 to 30% capacity on top of it. Aggregated signatures incentivize behaviors like aggregated coin joins, which is a very, very powerful characteristic. I welcome everyone to have a conversation with their local core developer about what we can do with aggregated signatures. Mast enables a bunch of really cool things, like where you can have federations external to the Bitcoin network, have smart contracting rules on Bitcoin that like instantiate automatic withdrawal from the federation in the event the federation stops advancing. There's a whole bunch of very interesting things that come from the kinds of upgrades that we're talking about along Core's pathway. Tumblebit, Mimblewimble, both amazing fungibility properties that come from those two systems. Mimblewimble, as described by Andrew Polster, is kind of a bit like Hawking's radiation. It's like we're a black hole, whatever. The only thing it emits is the energy of whatever it's destroyed or crushed, and that's essentially what happens in a Mimblewimble transaction. Then ultimately the Lightning Network addresses throughput concerns, because you can have an near infinite. The speed of light obviously mitigates some things, and obviously there's trust topologies in Lightning Network as well. But the Lightning Network enables, amongst your payment channel relationships, an infinite number of transactions up to the total amount of capital in the payment channels. And that is a very compelling scaling layering. You're talking about 1,000 to 10,000x on top of Bitcoin, not this kind of linear scale that you're going to get from a block size increase.
Exponential kind of scale.
It is a massive improvement, because it takes the transaction types that Roger is a valid Bitcoin user is entitled to want to make, and it moves the kind of trust required from those transactions from one that need to wait in a mempool and pay a high fee, or meet in the mempool and pay a fee to be included next, to one where he has a pre-attested amount of Bitcoin that he and that person agree have a different trust topology. And that is very compelling.
My turn.
Yes.
Roger, go ahead.
So I'd like to start out I'm excited about just about everything you just talked about, Johnny. Those are all great things that I'm looking forward to. Bitcoin Unlimited doesn't preclude any of those things. Right? The part that I'm concerned about is that right now, today, the Bitcoin network is less useful than ever before from the pure network protocol level, right? Transactions are more expensive, slower to confirm, easier to double spend. And I see you guys working on all sorts of things that are going to take years before they're ready, and you're not addressing the problems that the Bitcoin network is experiencing right now, today, whereas the Bitcoin Unlimited team is. The Bitcoin Unlimited team is working on addressing the problems that people that actually use Bitcoin for payments more than once a month are experiencing. They're having a nightmare. If you're running a business and using Bitcoin right now today, or if you have a payment processor or anything, you're being flooded with the support tickets from your customers saying, why didn't my transaction confirm? Why did this happen? What's wrong with this? It's a nightmare. We have to hire more people at Bitcoin.com to all these people that are new to Bitcoin and don't know much about it. They assume that Bitcoin.com is the official website, so they come to us and say, why didn't my transaction for, Bob's golddealer.com go through? And it's like, deal with him. So anyhow, this is a big problem, and the Bitcoin Unlimited team is trying to address the problems that Bitcoin is having today, whereas I see the core team not caring about the fundamental aspects that make Bitcoin useful today and wanting to build out all these Star Trek things that are going to be awesome. Like, I'm looking forward to these things. They're going to be here, but it's going to take years. Focus on the problems that Bitcoin has today, and once those are solved, then we can move to the next step.
So I would state that Segregated Witness right now would enable, on average, 130% capacity increase.
Which is not even nearly enough.
I think Ben of BitGo actually came out today and said that in the event that it was turned on, they were utilizing something like 16% of all block space, and as a result, fees would go down by about 50% if we activated Segregated Witness today. I mean, you can talk to Davenport yourself. It's not, that's not. But I mean, and a lot of the characteristics for the transaction types you're talking about for users, a lot of that had to do with the fact that, I mean, at least for 6 months ago and more recently as well, wallets were not properly utilizing fee estimations. So, for example, people were getting transactions.
What's an appropriate fee for a Bitcoin transaction?
I think today it was 30 cents, 25 cents.
What should it be is what I'm asking you.
Ultimately, it has to do with the space that's available. Like I said.
So how should the space that's available be set?
I think it's the price per byte. I'm not at the specifics of it.
Maybe you're not understanding my question. Now, how should the amount of space available for transactions to be put in and be set.
Basically, supply and demand.
Yeah, it's supply and demand. People, if you're willing,
So why
if
is
you're
the
willing
supply being artificially limited?
I don't think it is being artificially
It's
limited.
hard
What do you
capped
mean?
at 1 megabyte, and we knew for years and years and years that the Bitcoin network is going to be congested, and the current Bitcoin core team actively blocked every attempt to solve that problem for years in advance. And now that it's become a real problem for real people that are using Bitcoin, you guys are saying, "Oh, we've now made this thing Segregated Witness," which was months and months late from when it was initially promised. And you say, "Well, why don't you use this problem, this solution that we've created to solve the problem that we've created?" That's nuts, right?
Engineering's hard, and first off, it's not our problem. Satoshi set the 1 megabyte limit in, and thankfully, it actually happened to be a pretty good limit because
we have 2 minutes left, so maybe some final closing statements. Or
do we want to try to squeeze it in an extra topic, or probably not?
Nah, I don't think we have time.
Maybe closing statement for myself and Johnny. And
part of the problem with the fact that there's unbounded demand for free transactions and the fact that also scripts and signatures take computational work to verify is ultimately there's a topology to the network that we choose to, or not we choose, that the characteristics that the system happens to have are those that are robust, secure, and focus on censorship resistance. Okay, and there's obviously the moral hazard that comes from attempting a non-backwards compatible fork, because people who came before you and people who came after you and people who are joining Bitcoin today are opting into a system that has certain rule set. Attempting to change that rule set in a non-backwards compatible way forces those who came before you and those who are here now to opt into that rule set. And there's a lot of moral hazard in that kind of equation, which is why we choose to, why Bitcoin Core as a loosely affiliated group of individuals usually agree that soft forks are a methodology that are much more in the best interest of the Bitcoin network, because it doesn't force people to use the new rule set. Now,
so I have about a minute before I have to run.
All right, so go ahead, Roger, and I'll let him respond.
I thought that was his closing statement.
Okay, there you go.
So I guess I'd like to point out, so we just heard from Johnny, who's someone who uses Bitcoin about once a month by his own estimation there for a poker game here or there, works for a company that holds most of their assets in dollars, not in Bitcoin, who raised $75 million from traditional banks. That's my timer telling me I have to go. And whereas there's myself and the on-chain scaling people, we use Bitcoin every single day for commerce. We have over 30 employees at Bitcoin.com now, I think. Every single one of them is paid entirely in Bitcoin. We don't even have a bank account. We do more transactions than I can count every day. Myself personally does more transactions than I can count every day. And we heard from Johnny, he doesn't care how high the Bitcoin transaction fees get. It's just fine with him. I'm sorry if I'm putting words in your mouth.
You're mischaracterizing.
So but we did hear from him very clearly that he doesn't seem to care how easy it is to double spin Bitcoin transactions before they've been included in a block. For anybody that's using Bitcoin as a payment network and as a payment system, Bitcoin's in big trouble.
I would state that the use case you're describing for Bitcoin is one that is perfectly met by the Lightning Network.
That will be ready in several years, I hope.
Well, actually,
I hope it'll be ready tomorrow, but I think several years is the reality.
If you ask Lightning Labs or the Chaincode Labs guys, or I think there's 7 teams working on Lightning now.
So it's one thing to be ready in theory. It's another actually be ready for people to use to pay for their coffee downstairs.
Well,
and for it to be ready to pay for their coffee downstairs is years away, and I think we should probably agree on that.
If we activated Segregated Witness today, we'd have a malleability fix. And if we have a malleability fix, we could have the Lightning Network very soon versus 8 years away.
It takes time to build the software wallets for people to use it, especially on their mobile phones.
I agree. So,
I have to run, and I apologize, but...
all right, Roger, thank you so much for the debate. More interesting stuff.
Pleasure.
Look forward to round 2. Thank you, Johnny. I do appreciate it. So thank you, guys.
We have 100 live viewers. If anyone can stay for questions, I know Roger.
Yeah.
Is Jake out here? But Jake can fill in. Hey, Jake, you get round 2.
Please. Are we still going?
Yeah, I have to run, but you're
not this guy. No,
have a seat. Here's my seat.
Yeah, leave that camera running. Is that still running? Yeah, it's still running.
I got 100 live viewers.
John, do you mind staying for a little bit longer
I
field questions and stuff? I appreciate that. Excellent.
Did you hear everything up until now, Jake?
Yeah.
Okay. See you guys.
All right, thanks, Roger. All right, well, of course, thanks to John Dilley as well. Roger had to go. Second in a series of debates about segregated witness and Bitcoin Unlimited and the future of Bitcoin. And we're going to field some questions for John Dilley and for...
How about a word from our sponsor?
Yeah.
If you're tired of explaining Bitcoin or just want to know what Bitcoin is, no worries. Send your newbie friends to Bitcoin.com, the best source on the internet for experts and novices alike, with the latest news, uncensored forums, and all things Bitcoin in one location. Bitcoin.com does not welcome scammers, so you can trust your newbie friends to a safe source of information. Bitcoin.com is constantly evolving to make sure it's the most trusted source for Bitcoin information on the internet. That's Bitcoin.com.
The Crypto Show promises it is impartial and objective and not biased towards Bitcoin.com or its owners.
That's great.
I have a question.
Well, and I just want for our listeners, if they can't see for our viewers, we still have John Dilley, again, Segregated Witness. We've got Jake. What's your name?
Jake Smith with Bitcoin.com.
Jake Smith with Bitcoin.com. Just couldn't remember your last name. Surrogating. I don't know if that's a verb.
You speak Mandarin?
Yep. Ni hao.
It's actually movable.
Ni hao ma.
No, you
What?
were
No, I'm just
here.
kidding.
You can just ask a question.
And he's going to be standing in for Roger Ver. And then Trace Mayer, who I'm glad is getting a chance to join us. He was kind of sitting on the sidelines. He was responsible for the excellent questions, which I halfway butchered. But he's going to be able to... full way butchered. But he's going to be able to elaborate on some of the stuff we didn't get to if he wants to ask that for John Dilley and Jake. And then we are going to have some online questions and I guess in-person questions if anyone wants.
I want to ask the first question. I know Roger isn't here. I really wanted to ask Roger, but I didn't want to butt in. I got ridiculed in yesterday's debate that, well, I'm not a user of Bitcoin, I'm a saver. But in the beginning of that interview, he talked about how savers of Bitcoin is what gives Bitcoin value. That was a giant contradiction that just blew up all over the live stream. And I know Roger isn't here to address it, but what do you guys think about that?
I mean,
I'll take that one.
There you go.
I mean, ultimately, this isn't about a witch hunter. This isn't about who. It's not even necessarily about who's right and wrong. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion on what Bitcoin is. The point is that Bitcoin doesn't care what your opinion is, and that's an important characteristic of the system. Is that ultimately it needs to be resilient to political, personal, social maneuvering by arbitrary parties. Otherwise, the system doesn't work. Because if it can be manipulated by a single person, if it can be manipulated by a group of people, then ultimately the characteristics of the systems are one that are not interesting. It shouldn't be interesting to any of us, because that means the system can be co-opted by groups that are much more powerful or much more wealthy or much more nefarious or better at controlling the dynamics of crowds and dynamics of people in Bitcoin. So fundamentally, that's the core of this whole conversation, is what makes you a Bitcoiner, and what your opinion on Bitcoin is shouldn't matter from a characteristic of how the system operates. It's a protocol.
Yeah, and another issue with that is, I mean, Roger's right. There are a lot of reasons people value Bitcoin. And I gave a talk where I kind of kicked off this discussion titled "Why Hire Bitcoin?" Like we hire a milkshake. Like, why do we do it? Like, why hire Bitcoin? And I outlined 7 different network effects. And so the primordial network effect for why people own it is they want to speculate on it. And because people own it, that gives merchants a reason to accept it. So the merchant acceptance is a second network effect. And then because merchants accept it, consumers will use it. So that's the third network effect, and that's Purse.io. And
so this is sort of the order of network effects.
Yeah, these are the order.
How it gets adopted. Okay.
Yeah, the order of network effects. And so your more primordial network effects are more important. So, with store of value, then we have exchanges and wallets. With merchants, we have, Silk Road or Overstock or whatever. Then we have consumers using it because merchants accept it, so that's Purse.io. Then we have miners who secure it because it's got value from all of this stuff.
By the way, this is a really important insight, because I think a lot of fallacies arise from people getting those things out of order. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, and this is also informs my investment thesis. It's why I invested in Armory first, is because you got to be able to secure your Bitcoins in order to speculate on your Bitcoins. Like, it's not like, what good is having a bunch of Bitcoins if they get compromised and stolen, right? And so then you have a fifth network effect of developers. The best developers are going to want to work on on the most secure, most valuable blockchain. I mean, like if you're a legendary mountain climber, you don't go play around on like the kindergarten playground. You go climb freaking Mount Everest. And that's why Bitcoin for developers is getting more and more competitive. We have people like Dr. Adam Back, who's cited in the Bitcoin white paper, the Tor white paper. We have Bram Cohen, who invented BitTorrent. That's why they're working on Bitcoin, because it's freaking Mount Everest of all computer science projects right now.
And you could say that's why Bitcoin Core is so big as far as its development.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's why, and then everybody, at least the intellectual combustion, it gravitates to Bitcoin Core because that's where all the legendary developers are at. So, I mean, and you have to have people reviewing your code and testing your code, and what you want is you want other legends reviewing and testing your code. And so then you have developers, then you have the sixth network effect of financialization, so things like the ETF or Paul Chow's like Bitcoin swaps and other derivatives. And then you have world settlement currency, which Johnny actually came up with Liquid and at Blockstream. And Liquid is where exchanges are able to use Bitcoin as the settlement currency. And that's just the first initial uses of that particular network effect. But those are the 7 network effects that I've identified in their order that give people a reason to own or hold Bitcoin for different reasons. But the most important being that speculative or that store of value use case.
Yeah.
Can I take a stab at Tone's question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So Tone, I don't think anyone is trying to say that savings are not important, but if a saver does not have an easy way to move their money back out into something else to spend it, what value are you really storing?
Or just grab.
I mean, can we talk about the fact that Lightning addresses that?
How so?
Because you can have different accounts, like the difference between a savings and a checking account.
So you just mentioned Bitcoin.com paying all of its 30 employees' salaries in Bitcoin is an ideal use case for Lightning. I don't really think that a company locking up that much money in salaries is actually that compelling a use case.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if an amount of those savings comes from the blocks that you're creating, and I'm reasonably certain, I would want someone a little more technical than me to confirm, but I'm reasonably certain you could pay the output of a Coinbase to a Lightning address, and as a result pay to those respective parties who are connected via payment channel.
Are you talking about our mining pool?
Yes.
We pay out the blocks to our miners.
Ah, okay. So explicitly the amounts come from a different address than those from the Coinbase to the employees. That is.
Or for example, so I just bought a smoothie downstairs with Bitcoin.
Yes.
I'm here for a few days. Why am I going to open a Lightning channel with them? I'm going to make 2 or 3 transactions with them tops.
It's ultimately the Lightning channel topology could be that anyone they know who happens to have opened a channel with them and you happen to be connected to that person can pay through you or pay through them. So I think you're being a little disingenuous in that you think that Lightning can't address those concerns. They can under conditions where people actually end up using it.
I think Lightning does have some compelling use cases. I just don't think it's a panacea that will solve everything.
We have more questions, guys.
Okay, Tone. Shoot them at us.
Okay, I want to do a question or two, and I want Trace to speak up too on anything.
Hand off the questions to Chris.
Or, of course, Trace can also address some of the questions.
Sorry. Chicken scratch.
If I knew, I would have made them better. So several people have been asking, I don't know what this means, USFA. Or am I getting the acronym right? Or we'll get there. You know what that means, Johnny?
It's
right,
you
anyway,
stupid effing asshole.
United States Air Force.
So here's a
USA.
question. So, Jake,
watch out for those mining facilities.
Jake, this would be for you. I don't know if you know. How come Bitcoin Unlimited hasn't adopted Core Clients 13 through 14, which is about to come out, along with the hard fork of their code? Why haven't they taken those updates? Unless are there any problems in those updates that are people using now that you know of?
That would probably be a better question for the Bitcoin Unlimited developers, but Core puts out releases quite frequently, more frequently than Bitcoin Unlimited does, and BU does have a smaller number of developers. It requires time to refactor that code. Also, the nature of BU as a member-driven organization, code changes are voted on by the users.
Can you speak to the invalid block that they produced most recently?
Yeah, it was a bug. They resolved it.
Was that so that it was production code by that group?
Yes.
Okay. That resulted in the hard fork that cost the miners $13,000. How would that have affected like SPV users?
I don't think it would have. Bitcoin Unlimited, Bitcoin.com, our pool, mined an invalid block, and it was immediately discarded by the rest of the network.
I actually believe Antpool and F2Pool were both headfirst mining on top of that block. I believe.
And how long did it take them to switch to
the point being is there was a percentage-based chance that chain was actually extended and would have costed more people money because of the bug by that software.
There was a core hard fork in production code too.
What was that, Clark?
He said there was
a hard fork back in the day too.
Yeah, I mean
there was a core hard fork.
Hard fork.
Yeah, I mean that was I think Mike Hearn's first commit, right? Like with the level DB or something.
Yeah,
like somehow it made it past the goalies.
There's also an argument that that's not actually a hard fork. I prefer we stay current on issues, but that's
I think it's pretty silly to be pointing fingers saying he hard forked, no he hard forked. The truth is Bitcoin.com's Orphan block didn't really cost anyone except Bitcoin.com.
Not Orphan.
Any money.
Invalid. There's a difference.
Our block
maybe
was
you can
Orphan.
describe like what's the difference between an invalid and an orphan block? I mean, just for my own
Maybe
help.
Johnny can take that one.
An invalid block is one that is rejected comprehensively by the network because in this case it banned all BU peers that forwarded it because it's fundamentally not in consensus. An orphaned block is miners competing and maybe one extending a chain that both chains being valid, but one extended a chain that was not. Basically, one chain withered away and died versus the other one being extended.
So how could people have lost money with this? Like, let's say that you use a wallet that's on Bitcoin.com that's an SPV wallet, and then that SPV wallet was connecting to a Bitcoin Unlimited node. Like, how would a user have been affected with this?
I think
let's assume that like Antpool or FTPool did add like another 2 or 3 blocks on there, and next thing you know, you got like a chain running down. Like, I mean, how does that play out in terms of people actually losing money? Like,
you could have had someone who was utilizing Bitcoin Unlimited peer as their trusted source of the network, and then in the event that it was extended further, you could have had conditions where a user accepted a payment as valid, seeing confirmations from an invalid block. And then, for example,
there were no confirmations on that block, and there would have been about a 30-second window in which a zero confirmation would have been invalid.
I understand that, but in the event that it was extended,
well, I mean, I'm just
in the event that it was extended, it wouldn't be invalid.
How much of that was luck, though, versus?
Well, I mean, I'm looking at this as a hypothetical. Like, let's say I'm using Bread Wallet, but my Bread Wallet connects to a Bitcoin Unlimited node for its like actual validation, right? Because it's like SPV.
I actually want to speak to that. No, if you're headfirst mining and you extend an invalid block because it's through SPV, you're basically headfirst mining. You can extend an invalid block if you're just mining on a header.
I would also like to point out, I believe the block was 1,016 bytes. In a Bitcoin Unlimited world, that wouldn't really be a bug. That would be perfectly acceptable to have a block larger than 1 megabyte.
So, I mean, so you're saying Bitcoin Unlimited was working as intended, or was it a bug? Or I'm just
ideally that behavior should not have happened because it was not in consensus with the majority of the network.
Yeah, I mean, but how could people have lost money with this? Because like it looks like we've got a security issue here. If you've got your SPV wallet that's connecting to like a Bitcoin Unlimited
no users lost money. Our mining pool thought that we had found a block.
Like,
and
and that's nice because it was only 1 block. But let's say that like Antpool or F2Pool actually had gotten like 2 or 3 blocks ahead. Next thing you know, you got like these divergent chains, and some new user who's come to Bitcoin.com and like downloaded the wallet that they're like recommending.
It would depend on the peers you're connected to ultimately. So, because instantly, the moment they relayed it, BU clients were banned from basically all.
Yeah, but it created another network among the Bitcoin Unlimited clients.
The idea would be is that if your trusted source of the network was a BU a client essentially that said that this is a valid block, despite the fact that it was larger than consensus enabled, you would see that as a confirmation, and you would see the headfirst validations on top of that as additional confirmation.
So maybe you could help explain this, Johnny. Like, what's the difference then between like this network consensus, which are the miners who are actually mining the blocks, and then the economic consensus that appears to be taking place with your Bitcoin Unlimited node or with your Bitcoin Core node?
Yeah, I would say this is ultimately the fundamental misconception that Bitcoin Unlimited proponents bring to the table. It's ultimately the fact that consensus in Bitcoin is not miner-driven. It's economically incented node-driven.
How are you quantifying that?
I don't think that's an important characterization.
I think that's a very important characterization.
I'm trying to let me. Can I finish the point first?
Yeah.
miners happen to drive the chain forward. That's Bitcoin's fundamental interesting characteristic, is that denial of service is not really possible so long as proof of work continues to drive the chain forward. So as long as electricity is being appended to Bitcoin, Bitcoin will continue to move forward. In the event that you bring to the table a block that has a rule set that's rejected across the majority of nodes, or a node set that's economically incentivized, your block is invalid. It's fundamentally not in consensus. So the way Bitcoin Unlimiters look at changing or evolving the protocol is much more attack-minded. It's much more, I can force changes upon the network as a result of me having hash power. I can force changes upon the network as a result of stalling progress otherwise. I think fundamentally the mindset that core developers take is one where we much more value the Bitcoiners of the past, the holders of Bitcoin who only periodically check in with their 11.0 nodes, their 12.0 nodes, their 9.0 nodes, their 7.0 nodes, then those, we take characteristics that are forwards compatible. So forwards and backwards compatible. This is an example of being segregated witness. It enables a new transaction type, and if you are not a segregated witness node, if you're running 12.0, if you're running 11.0, you can still validate the whole chain state. You can still validate the total number of Bitcoins. You can still validate that a block is still the size that's allowed. But fundamentally, the kinds of moral hazard that's brought to the table with this kind of attack, let's change the network via force methodology, kind of undermines what it means to be a Bitcoiner, in my opinion.
I think that's a complete mischaracterization of what Bitcoin Unlimited actually is. It is a free market-driven approach, and it is simply enabling different nodes, mining and not, to communicate with one another.
Are you comfortable with Bitcoin splitting into two?
I would prefer that don't, but I believe in the free market.
Well, I know, but are you comfortable with that fact? You actively are comfortable and work in a world where Bitcoin splitting in two is allowed.
I think at least one of the two chains would be the dominant one by far, and I think that would be resolved very quickly.
How did that work in Ethereum?
I think Ethereum holders still have their Ethereum, and they also have ETC, and both of those things are worth money.
What about the moral hazard that comes to the table as a result of that splice?
What about the moral hazard where people have a certain view of the currency and they're not being allowed to realize that view?
Let me ask you real quick, based on what you just said, and then in a minute I want to get to a question from somebody here in the audience. I kind of asked this to Detone, Vase, and Roger yesterday. I'll ask it again, just for you, John, and everyone else. Is there is it a good analogy to compare Ethereum with Bitcoin as far as a potential fork? I mean, are they really the same thing for the same reasons? Because, of course, Ethereum, it was an immutability issue, and it went against the philosophical grain as well of the mission statement of Ethereum.
I would state that my personal opinion is that consensus in Bitcoin is paramount. Like, ultimately, putting a change into the network should be something that the vast majority of people agree to. Under conditions where you don't do that, you're basically creating a governance structure over the network where you incentivize some at the expense of others. And in the case of Bitcoin Unlimited, it's explicitly empowering miners at the cost of nodes right now. Explicitly.
Once again, how are you going to measure what the vast majority of people want? If you read Satoshi's white paper, it's pretty clear that decisions are made. I mean,
we're not going to speak to the system's creator, which is 8 years ago now.
Satoshi Nakamoto.
So 8 years ago now. Ultimately, the fundamental information we've learned about the system since Satoshi has left, things, for example, like attack blocks, things, for example, like the fact that pooled mining, things, for example, like ASICs, characteristics of the system are different. So you can't.
So you think Bitcoin is no longer a system in which it's one hash, one vote?
Like I said, I believe fundamentally the system is one where miners follow consensus; they do not lead it.
One quick relevant question, and then I want to get to this gentleman's question. We also have some online questions I want to get to as well. I had asked this earlier. I don't think we touched upon it. Hopefully, it's a relevant question. Is there any adversarial relationship between miners and Bitcoin Core? And I forget the context in which this arose earlier, but there seemed to be some implication of that in something you had said.
So miners,
I could be wrong about my interpretation.
So fundamentally, Bitcoin works as a result of that you can minimize the trust topology of settlement of a payment. So in a world where, for example, miners conglomerate into a single institution or a pair of institutions or a couple of institutions, the attack surface of that Bitcoin is one that is uninteresting to Bitcoin users. You should not want to use a Bitcoin where the trust topology of the miners is such that there are like, if there's 3 guys and you can go compromise 3 guys and as a result you own or run Bitcoin.
Why do you think miners are going to conglomerate into one entity?
It's strategic and profitable to centralize.
I don't think it is. I think miners are incentivized to do what's in the best interest of the network.
Then why
so
did they headfirst mine on an invalid block then?
Because headfirst mining offers clear advantages to miners?
And it's centralized. That's the point. Like, they centralize. They do things that centralize as a result of the fact that it empowers them relative to miners that are not centralized.
It's a slight degree of trust being placed in other miners. So I don't think it is an existential risk at all, as you seem to be making out.
No. I'm stating that in the event that trust required of miners increases further, it's a problem to the fungibility, censorship resistance, and decentralized robustness of the system.
Well, people should validate their own transactions, right?
Yes, and fundamentally in a
then
world
what difference does it make if miners are headfirst mining?
Well, fundamentally in a world where block size were to get too large, your ability to actually validate your own transactions or validate the whole chain state becomes literally impossible with consumer hardware. It gets to the point where you can go back to Scaling Bitcoin Montreal. Patrick Straitman or Phantom Circuit did a very, very good piece on this. Basically, initial block download time scales exponentially relative to the size of the blocks increasing. So you will eventually, if you scale on-chain too much, you eventually get to the point where you will not be able to catch up to the chain tip with consumer hardware, because Moore's Law isn't really increasing anymore. That's a fundamental mischaracterization of people who think that Bitcoin can scale in the context of Moore's Law. Like if you look at the difference between the gigahertz of a very recent Intel CPU and the gigahertz of an Intel CPU 6 years ago, they're very similar.
Can you elaborate on this real quick? And I hate to delay this gentleman's question, but real quick, that's a very interesting question you brought up. When we had Yoshi from Bitmain on a while back, he brought up how the S9, their latest iteration of their miner, is likely to be their cutting edge one for some time because of the Moore's Law, impediment they're hitting up against. With getting to that quantum scale limitation, what does that say for the future of Bitcoin as far as the need for increasing hashing power for a growing network? What does that have any implication for?
That's a pretty big question. So I think there's a couple of questions there. One is, what's the appropriate level of security for Bitcoin? I think that's one question there. Another one is, what are the characteristics of a Bitcoin where the ASIC race has ended as a result of you've gotten to the actual fundamental limit of current foundries, and as a result you can't necessarily make your chip any faster or any more power efficient without huge expense. And I think a third is, what characterizations would we like to see as a result of ASICs being increasingly commoditized as a result of that?
I'm impressed with how many questions I had just trapped in one.
Hey, like I said earlier, like you're the king here. It's not certainly not me or Jake or Trace. No, I think so. To the first, I think it's in a world where, actually I'll go to the second first. So in a world where ASICs are at the fundamental limit, we may see a increased distribution of miners as a result of the fact that miners can't leapfrog forward in comparison to current miners. I would like to see that. I would love to see miners selling equipment at cost. I would love to see more and more pools that are owned by independent agents. I would love to see pools change the way that their transaction selection policy works to empower the individual miner who owns the hash rate on the pool. There's a lot of characteristics there that are interesting. Commoditization in general, it's difficult to, in a world where miners are incentivized to make money. Like, that's why it's in their short-term interest to hash, because for whatever reason they happen to be able to turn electricity into Bitcoin blocks. That's a rate which they can make a profit. In that kind of a world, being able to ship a box that would make you money based off electricity inbound to someone else for them to make money implies that it wasn't going to make you money. So it's not necessarily in a miner's best interest to ship a box that they could just turn on for hashing power. And I think to the last one, what the appropriate amount of security is for Bitcoin. I'm not sure. We can't actually know what the appropriate level of security is. Fundamentally, we know it keeps going up, but right now we're in a world where the vast majority of miners are paid via inflation. And inflation in Bitcoin
That's a good point. That's going to eventually stop.
Inflation eventually trends to zero, and a number of the proponents of Bitcoin Unlimited live in a world where centralization of mining could put pressure. If you hand the control of the system over to the miners entirely, they might be like, I think we should have a world which has 1% inflation. And you might be able to convince a number of economically incentivized nodes that are running the network to do so if you bribe them, or for example, if you do other strategic action that's external to the system's operation.
But then you might as well have the Federal Reserve targeting 2% inflation.
Why are we spending all this money on hash rate, and why are we spending all this? Why did holders hold on to all these Bitcoin if fundamentally we're just comfortable with the trust a conglomerate of miners topology? No, that's fundamentally not what being a Bitcoiner means.
Okay, I want just a quick. Do you have a quick response to that, Jake? And then I want to get to this gentleman's question.
Okay, so I think the whole miner centralization thing is actually a total myth. Prior to Bitcoin.com, I worked for Bitmain in China. I have visited many different large ASIC farms in China and in the US. I've seen more and more pop up. It's more and more people. We actually are seeing the trend where the solo miners who have enough hash rate are now forming their own pools. In fact, I think that's a lot of the new pools that are popping up out of China these days. So I think the notion that mining is getting more centralized is complete bullshit, to be honest. Secondly, as to the point,
we can't say that on air, but we're not on air, so fuck it.
Who are they buying their ASICs from?
Bitmain is one of the main hardware suppliers.
One of the? Can you name two other hardware suppliers?
Canaan Creative, they make Avalon.
Okay.
There's another company whose name I forget right now who has, I think they make a copy of the Avalon.
Okay.
Bitfury sells their shipping containers.
Okay, so that's four manufacturers.
Okay, but that doesn't imply centralization of hash rate.
Yeah, there's a control point there in that.
It's economies of scale. I can't go start taping out my own ASIC chips right now.
You can if you have enough money, but
Exactly.
but fundamentally, from a control point, if you empower those individuals, which in this case they're the only ones who can tape out ASICs apparently, they are a political weak point in such that they're the ones you have to start and bootstrap your pool from. So it doesn't matter if you bootstrap a pool and you're not really independent because you were sold the gear.
As soon as you buy that gear, you're 100% independent.
No, I understand that. But
why doesn't Blockstream take some of your $76 million and go make ASIC chips if that's so important?
I'm here as a Bitcoiner. I'm not here as a Blockstreamer, but let's keep the personal attacks to a minimum.
I don't think that's a personal attack.
I can talk about.
Well, if the concern is about lack of companies producing chips, where are the people getting the money and making more chips?
Well,
it's a very profitable business.
This is definitely an interesting point about the sort of point of control with a limited number of agents making hardware. I will say, though, on the flip side of that, there's no objective way of determining a perfectly competitive market. In other words, you might have 5 players in a market. That doesn't mean it's necessarily an oligopoly or cartel because there's no objective way of determining the optimum number of players in the market.
I would say the concern's worse. The concern there is not about the characterization of the economics of those businesses. It's about the political characterization of those businesses.
Thank you.
It's the fact that a pool can only start at the behest of those parties. That is what he's saying.
And if I can count it on one hand, you're right. That is a very
you must buy hardware from that handful of individuals,
or you can buy it on the massive secondary market from somebody who's already bought it.
Okay, so then you're behind in terms of efficiency, but that's an allowable characterization. But fundamentally, if you want to get current tip hardware, it requires that you meet the political characteristics of someone that the manufacturers of those ASICs will sell to.
You can go to Bitmain's website right now, and for less than $2,000, I think you can buy one.
Let's hold off on this. This is actually something we could come back to if we have time. This is actually a pretty important topic. I mean, we could go on forever, but I do want to get to some other questions real quick. He's been waiting very patiently.
That's fine.
What a trooper. We appreciate it. What's your name?
Thank you. My name is Felix. I've been traveling on Bitcoin around the world for 2 years now.
Wow.
And using it in over 30 countries.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Have you only used Bitcoin the whole time?
I don't have a bank account or credit card anymore, so I completely live off the grid. So my question is...
No, he's fine on ours. We don't care about yours.
My question is continues with on what Tone was asking before on remerging or rebasing some of the things that the core team was putting up, not necessarily Segregated Witness, because right now, as far as I am informed, Bitcoin Unlimited actively does not merge that into their code base. So it seems to be like, okay, we either go this way or the other way full, but why? I mean, I don't agree with how you would, like with the safety of your hard fork proposal. I don't think we will ever have one or not. That is completely out of debate. The question is only like, right now, if I run Bitcoin Unlimited, why can't I also signal for SegWit?
I think it's a very common misconception that the two are mutually exclusive.
Yes,
currently
they are in Bitcoin Unlimited right now.
Currently, no production release of Bitcoin Unlimited has integrated SegWit, but I think there is a BUIP proposal right now in the Bitcoin Unlimited forums, which would do exactly that.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? I'm not anti-SegWit either. I agree with what Roger was saying just a few moments ago, that the block size problem is much more urgent, and Bitcoin Unlimited offers a much more feasible fix to that right now.
But Roger also wanted to like see Lightning happening in the future, and I mean, SegWit offers like also script updates, which is I think one of the even better than only Lightning proposals.
It's not one or the other.
Yeah, exactly. But apparently in Unlimited, it does look like it's one or the other.
It has not been added to any current production releases. That doesn't mean it will always be that way.
Okay. I mean, Felix, like ultimately, I would address this by that. Unlimited right now, or at least it's the current production version of it, is about 4,000 commits behind, 50,000 code diff, 50K code diff. And what we're on release candidate 2 of 14.0, and Bitcoin Unlimited's, I believe, based on 12.1. So you're talking about 3 full releases. No,
that's a pretty long backlog.
2 major releases and 2 minor releases from core is what they're behind. It's a substantial difference in sync time. It's a substantial difference in the characteristics of the operations, and ultimately it's a huge difference in the amount of review.
Well, all that code is open source, so at any time it can be merged to any other alternate client.
Do you know how difficult it is to review Bitcoin? It's very difficult.
Well, if the review's been done on the code, then it's still there, right?
That doesn't mean that the Bitcoin Unlimited review's been done on the code, though, right?
That would be a question for the Bitcoin Unlimited guys. Again, I don't know why I'm being treated as a spokesperson for Bitcoin Unlimited.
Well, no, it's fair for them to ask, but it's fair for you to then defer to the
it's
developer.
I'm not a developer.
It's the main wallet that's offered on
That's the one that Bitcoin.com is running on their mining pool, no?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's why I was asking.
But also, why do people make the assumption that Bitcoin Unlimited isn't doing their own review as well? Yes, we had the bug. Maybe that was an oversight.
What's like the build process for Bitcoin Unlimited?
That would be a question for the Bitcoin Unlimited developers. I am not a developer.
Well, let's, Felix, did that kind of satisfy your question?
Thank you,
Felix. Let's go on to some internet questions. It's a long time overdue.
They just answered the top one, so it's the second and third.
Okay, gotcha. User-activated soft fork, is that a possibility? Is
Johnson Lau responded to this on the Bitcoin dev mailing list, and he's much more technical than I am. But the characteristics of a user-activated soft fork I don't know. I don't buy it. I think.
How would that even work? I guess in theory.
No. The point is that if you read Johnson Lau's response, there are substantial vectors of uncertainty, not to mention the fact that how it would work are primarily it's not well defined, and the proposal or whatever it is that the person who did it brought up, I think his name is Shaolin or something, is not something I can really speak to, but I think that there's probably at the very least a ton of incentives problems as a result of it. Not to mention the fact that nodes are reasonably easy to Sybil, so it's not something that can happen as a result of node structure.
So there are technical things you don't know. You have to defer to people.
It is a sliding scale. I get schooled by GMAX and SIPA and all the time.
You're not a developer, Johnny?
No, I'm not. I'm not a developer. I'm technical strategy.
I hear what you're saying, and they're assuming you're a developer, but you're not.
I have a single contribution to Bitcoin Core.
All right, let's do the next question. Does Core ever plan to do a block size increase?
I would defer to the roadmap. I think if there was consensus behind it, we would.
Okay.
It would, but ultimately that depends on the definition of
Does
consensus.
the Hong Kong consensus count?
Actually, if you look at the Hong Kong consensus, the developers that attended that conversation followed through on the relative demands that were made of them. They were asked to code up or develop or work on varied hard forks, and they were shown to the community, and they did not get consensus.
Where's the code for the 2 megabyte hard fork that was supposed to be in July?
You can look at Luke's relative.
The one that goes to 300 kilobytes, that one?
I mean, I believe it's defined as a soft fork for like 7 years or something. But again, there's relative, and SIPA had one that was 17% growth, and just they don't get consensus because they have varied problems about the way in which they're implemented. There's moral hazard all over the place. There's the componentry about how you upgrade the system is very delicate. The incentives in play here are very delicate. And it appears to me
I thought Bitcoin was anti-fragile. I don't think it's as delicate as you're making it out to be.
It appears anti-fragile up until the point it shatters. That's how anti-fragile systems work.
And actually, it's funny you bring that up because John Dilley, when we had him on last year before, made the point that anti-fragile is just an appearance. Anti-fragile is because there's so many developers working on fixing bugs, making improvements, that it's not like inherent to the system necessarily.
I think it's the whole like decentralized network. That's what makes it anti-fragile. Look at Ethereum and ETC. Both of those networks are still alive and kicking. Just because they had a hard fork, maybe it dropped the price.
They're both very centralized. Like, what are you talking about?
How are you defining that?
I mean, proof of Vitalik is not particularly interesting to developers of Bitcoin.
I think the mere fact that ETC exists is proof that Vitalik does not have absolute say over every single thing that happens to Ethereum.
Would you say, at the very least, it's percentage based by market cap?
I think he has the trust of the people who use Ethereum.
I think ultimately that's the difference of opinion here. It's about do you want to trust us a very small group of people who state that we should move forward with a change to the entire structure of how Bitcoin's consensus works, or do we use soft forks?
I think ETC was a great demonstration of the users actually do have the ability to disagree with whatever the project is saying, and I think we're seeing that happen right now in Bitcoin with the rise of Bitcoin Unlimited.
I wouldn't call it a rise.
Okay, well,
okay. Go ahead.
I have a really good question. Just came from the internet. Had like multiple thumbs up specifically for you, Jake.
Okay, please.
So here's the question: If tomorrow Roger Ver suddenly decided to support Bitcoin Core and not Bitcoin Unlimited, would you continue to support Bitcoin Unlimited?
Yes, absolutely. And I'd probably stop working for Roger if that happened.
Okay, so basically the question is, do you personally truly believe in Bitcoin Unlimited as the next step? And you're saying that you do.
Yes, 100%.
And that you would feel it as a sort of violation if Roger were to change. Okay.
Yes, I also supported Bitcoin Classic and Bitcoin XT.
Yeah. No, and that's legitimate. I'm just trying to clarify just because...
People think like all of Roger's employees are his lackeys and we believe what we believe because he gives us money. That's not true at all.
Well, no, and I think that's why it's a great question and a great answer to allow you to be able to state that, so people don't to disabuse people of that notion, because I think that's a very fair thing. Yeah. So.
All right, we got another good question here. How come Bitcoin Core decided to go with a 95% consensus before activation? How come BU went with 75%?
BU didn't go with 75. That was a plan laid out by Yang Haipo in a blog post by BTC guy.
Okay, so what is the...
BU has no activation threshold.
It has no activation threshold?
No.
So, okay. I'm confused. I'm sorry. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so when miners running Bitcoin Unlimited are in general agreement that it would be safe to fork, they can initiate a fork.
And how did they decide that it's safe to fork?
I mean, they could do it right now with their 15 or 20% or whatever it's at today.
And that brings us to another good question right after that one. Why haven't they forked yet?
Because nobody wants a minority fork.
Okay, so what is your definition of a majority then?
51%.
So the moment, okay, so what you're saying is the moment Bitcoin Unlimited signaling reaches 51%, you will fork off the network?
No, I did not say that, and I don't think anyone at BU is saying that either.
So do you have at least an estimate of the percentage that you believe is safe to fork the network?
That's why the 75% number was thrown out.
But do you believe in that number? Or is there at least a percentage of how many people working on Bitcoin Unlimited development feel that number is a little low or feel that number is a little high?
The higher the percentage, the more decisive the fork would be, but I think there's general consensus that 75% would be adequately decisive.
You want to comment on this, Johnny?
I mean, yes, you can attack the network at 51%.
If it's a majority, why are you labeling it an attack?
Because fundamentally, like such mining or aggressive reorganization can occur with 50.0001% of the hash rate sustained. It doesn't mean that any of the nodes will necessarily capitulate to such a hostile endeavor.
Are you saying BU is hostile?
Personally, I think it is an attempt to change the political nature of how upgrades are done with Bitcoin to one that is controlled by a much smaller group of people.
I don't know what's hostile about supporting a free market and free speech-based approach.
I actually do feel that BU is hostile. That would be my personal answer.
Don't feel. Explain.
Okay.
To be fair.
May I ask maybe another question towards
I'll get back to that.
The unlimited idea. I to be honest, I haven't read totally about like unlimited and how they want to do that everything, but like the name itself suggests to me that you kind of have like unlimited blocks. So basically, at any time you can have like pretty much every miner can take the whole mempool, dump it into a block, and mine a full block eventually. And such, then the mempool is empty and there are no more fees to grab. So now the next miners pretty much have an incentive to hard fork, or not hard fork, but like offering that block off, because eventually as the subsidy goes down, there's no more new coins to mine, and the only way to get more coins is by mining, because there's no new transactions yet, right?
I mean, the Bitcoin difficulty algorithm would continue working as intended. It would still be 10 minutes per block.
Yes.
So you would have more transactions coming
after 10 minutes, but not after like the 30 seconds. So in the first 30 seconds.
That already happens now, though, because it's a random.
Well, right now we have the fees make up like what, 3%, 4% of the block.
I think it's about 7.5%.
7%. Okay. Well, and that will continue to increase, right? So eventually the percentage will be more than 100%. So the fees will make up more of the reward of the miners than the subsidy. And in that case, in the first couple seconds, when a new block is found, it is actually an incentive for the miners to offer off that block the other miners.
So yeah, Felix, ultimately what you're touching on, it's a little bit nuanced, but the system is unreliable under conditions where there's not a persistent backlog in a world where there's no inflation. Primarily because miners now are only paid via fees, and if you can't be certain about the fees being there as a result of something like a backlog or a persistent mempool, and you can capture the entirety of a mempool in a given block, miners are now explicitly attacking one another.
You're also suggesting that
minor cannibalization.
You're suggesting that the miners would completely undermine the system that keeps paying their bills.
No, like the point would be is that to actually pay their bills, that would be a reliable way for them to
wouldn't, though, because
earn.
if that causes the people to lose trust in the Bitcoin network and the value subsequently drops, then...
Do you agree there has to be a fee backlog?
No.
You don't?
No.
Then how do you characterize what a cost is to the network? How do you characterize demand?
I think the free market is more than capable of figuring that out.
The way you do that is by having supply. And
as it did for the first 8 years of Bitcoin when there was no transaction backlog.
And 100% subsidy.
Yes.
And that was adequate, and that was actually...
Yes, but that will not be the case in 20 years.
Yes, and I think that's why we need to increase the block size, so when the time comes, there are enough transactions that those fees can pay for the miners.
Well, interesting stuff.
But then why are you complaining right now that the fees are too high? Don't you want the miners to get paid?
I think they can get paid plenty from the block reward.
Do you think the 130% on average capacity increase from segregated witness will alleviate fee concerns in the short term?
I think it would alleviate it in the very short term, maybe for a few months. But I don't see anything on the table from Bitcoin Core that would seem to indicate that they would plan to go beyond that also in the near term.
What about Schnorr signatures? What about?
I said also in the near term.
Okay, so you just want fees to just continually go to the floor? Like, where's your trade-off?
Why do you think they would continually go to the floor?
At what point do fees start paying for the security of the network in your
Did transactions only magically start costing money as soon as blocks filled up?
No,
they
there's
did not.
Unbounded demand for free transactions. Unbounded.
What do you mean unbounded?
then fundamentally, the system is also happens to be storage. You can store things like op return and such like that. So if transactions were free in Bitcoin, cost to nodes would bear the entire externality cost of storing everyone's.
Then why weren't blocks
data.
full until 6 months ago? Did this unbounded demand only arise 6 months ago?
Because miners make decisions about the minimum amount they're willing to spend. So, it doesn't. What do you mean exactly though? Like there happens to be a feedback log.
So you seem to think the miners are going to shoot themselves in the foot.
I fundamentally have a different characterization of you about how the trust topology of the network works in the context of the miners versus the users. That's it.
I don't think it is miners versus users. I think the miners are a component of the users.
Okay, so real quick, I don't want to go forever with this. This is a very interesting discussion. We do have an interview to do actually with Carlos Morales here in a little bit. So let's do another maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And Trace, you've been a little quiet. I don't know if you have anything to ask or to throw out there. If you do, feel free. And then if there's anyone else in the audience who maybe has a question, don't be shy.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this earlier when we set up, when we were going over the agenda for the initial debate. And, you know, just the importance of code review. For example, what if there were a transaction, let's say that the network were to split and we had a Bitcoin Unlimited coin and we had a Bitcoin Core coin, and you were to make a transaction on the Bitcoin Unlimited network that somehow leaked your private key to your Bitcoin Core coin because there wasn't sufficient review of the Bitcoin Unlimited code. And there might actually be even incentive for somebody to sneak that type of compromise into the Bitcoin Unlimited software. So, you know, I think it's very important that we have this peer review process that goes on with any new code that gets put into a client that we're using. And so that's why I was, you know, particularly curious about the code review and the build process of Bitcoin Unlimited, but I guess like defer to the developers. But from what I understand, like most of the skilled developers who have a proven track record are all working on Bitcoin Core. So
have you ever talked to Andrew Stone, the lead developer at BU?
No.
He has a pretty nice track record too. Maybe you could look into it.
What's he done?
He has built telco networks for the last few decades.
What
that
about
have scaled to hundreds of millions of users?
How about distributed consensus networks? And like wallet software? So I mean, he's built stuff like cryptographer, or
he's worked with C++. I don't really think that
that's good.
I don't think the scaling issues that Bitcoin faces right now are cryptography related. It's networking.
Why? I mean, what I'm interested in is like, if the network splits into two, how do you know when you're sending transactions on the Bitcoin Unlimited network that you're not leaking private key data or data that could derive private key data to your Bitcoin
when
Core
you broadcast a signed transaction that could be rebroadcast on the other chain? That's called a replay attack?
No. I'm talking about a different attack where you leak data in your transaction that you could then derive private keys from Bitcoin Core with.
I think that would have been noticed if that were the case.
Maybe Johnny, you want to speak to that at all?
I mean, I don't want to talk about hypotheticals. It's not. I don't think that's necessarily a good use of time.
Okay.
All right. Well,
Johnny, you may not be able to. It's a tough question. You're at the Blockstream office, so you do hear. What are the general impressions of Bitcoin Unlimited's programming skills and capabilities and competence in leading the way? Because my opinion is, if Bitcoin Unlimited gets adopted, my speculation is a lot of Bitcoin Core developers will just find jobs that pay them even more money that have nothing to do with Bitcoin. And what is the general view of the people in your circles about the competency of the Bitcoin Unlimited developers?
I mean, I won't speak to other people's opinions, but what I will speak to is that if Bitcoin can be co-opted by political maneuvering, it's no longer an interesting system. Because the characteristics, capabilities, and nuance that larger corporate state pick your poison actors can bring to the table are several orders of magnitude greater than anything that's being done right now in Bitcoin. So I fundamentally think that the the state of where things are right now is actually it's actually good for Bitcoiners. It's good for Bitcoin. We're in a position where people are locked in lively conversation and debate about the characteristics of systems, the characteristic of what Bitcoin is, how people conceive of what Bitcoin means to them, of what it means to other people, and fundamentally that the defensive traits that come from Bitcoiners who are holders, Bitcoiners who are engaged in the process, learning what attacks to Bitcoin look like, make the system stronger and more resilient. Regardless of the characteristics of the outcome of this, in the event that we retain some a form of backwards compatibility, we end up with a system where people, as a result of the conversations around Bitcoin itself progressing, are more apt and able to understand Bitcoin, more apt and able to understand what makes Bitcoin valuable.
Yeah, excellent. Let's get to this gentleman's question. What was your name, sir?
I'm Bruce Fenton.
Oh, yeah. I don't know how out of context, I didn't recognize you, but Bruce Fenton, everybody. Welcome.
My question is for Jake. I'm wondering, what could Core do that would make you drop Unlimited and support Core? If they did the 2 megabyte block size increase, or is there something else that could be done?
At this
or
point,
is it too late?
At this point, it goes so much beyond the block size.
So there isn't anything that Core could do. If you had a magic wand that you could influence the Core developers.
So my beef is not so much with every single individual in Core. It's more with Core, the entity, the group that puts out software binaries. I think that needs to be completely gotten rid of. And I hope that in a future where we have multiple competing Bitcoin clients on the market, that many of the Core developers stick around and keep contributing code.
We do have competing Bitcoin implementations. Yours is Bitcoin the only one out of consensus.
I mean, Satoshi said, I hate to say Satoshi said, but he said it's not a good idea to have competing implementations. They should always be.
He said because it would make a headache for him as the project maintainer.
Okay. Just another question. Would you I don't think unlimited blocks are a very good idea conceptually because of the backlog of transactions. I don't want to get into that, but
can you mention your background?
I get paid in Bitcoin for programming jobs. What do you mean?
Some of your background.
I started programming when I was like 12 years old, and I got in Bitcoin 2012 or something, 13. I don't know exactly. I mean, I understand the protocol pretty well down to the grid, and I haven't contributed anything yet, but maybe in the future. Anyway, so the question is, would you? I think again, unlimited blocks are a terrible idea, but would you try to get unlimited blocks as a soft fork, for instance, like with extension blocks or something? Why are you forced to go the hard fork way, where you will have the risk, and we have seen it with the TEC of the split in currency?
So I actually don't think hard forks are that risky. Monero hard forks twice a year. I think Ethereum has had some absurd number of hard forks in the last year. Only one has resulted in a coin split, and that was because they were changing some property that people viewed as absolutely fundamental to the currency. I don't think 1 megabyte blocks are fundamental to Bitcoin's monetary propriety. I don't think the 1 megabyte block size.
This is just as contentious as the Ethereum.
I understand that that's what the point of contention is, but I don't think that undermines Bitcoin's monetary properties.
Are you saying because it's kind of arbitrary whether it's 1 megabyte, half a megabyte, 2 megabytes?
Bitcoin is still sound money, whether the blocks are half a megabyte or 2 megabytes.
The moral hazard of your arbitrary construction around what is or is not something that's consensus critical is the problem, because the exact same argument can be made about, like, well, I think 1% inflation is also something that is potentially not contentious. And then you could make the same kind of attack vector to Bitcoin and the exact same methodology.
I don't know why you think people would all of a sudden decide that Bitcoin should change to an inflationary system. I don't know why people are suddenly comfortable suddenly removing backwards compatibility between clients. If a sufficient enough majority of people did want an inflationary Bitcoin, then I welcome them to go do that.
Would you back an inflationary Bitcoin?
Absolutely not, because I think Bitcoin is sound money. And I think most early Bitcoiners would agree with me.
Do you believe hard forking being a difficult thing, hard forking being something that is critical to immutability, or the lack of hard forking being something that's critical to immutability, is a necessary characteristic of a sound protocol?
I only think hard forking is difficult when certain people try to make it so. Monero doesn't have any difficulty hard forking.
Monero's hard forks haven't been controversial much, and that's one of the reasons. Ethereum was very controversial.
I think there's a very specific group of people,
and this is obviously very controversial. Doesn't matter on which side you are. It's obviously controversial, so that will result in a currency split 100%.
This debate goes back to 2010. People have been talking about the need to raise the block size for 7 years.
By the way, as we kind of wrap up, I'm going to see if there's any more questions from the audience. But as we wrap up, I want to thank everybody involved. Bruce Fenton, thank you. Felix, for your question. Everyone online. John Dilley, Jake Smith, of course, and Trace Mayer. But in particular, Jake, I want to thank you because it did kind of turn into a multiple person on one situation, and that's not easy. And you've done a very good job of fielding a lot of the questions. You know, whether or not everyone agrees, whether or not there's consensus, whether or not X, Y, or Z person is right or wrong, you did an excellent job of that. So
Consensus is hard. Fun. Consensus is hard. It's hard. It really is.
Yeah, well said.
Well, unless you're a centralized system like Ripple or.
We still have 100 live viewers, guys.
It gets harder the more people are in the system.
Does anyone else in the audience have any questions?
Well, we have
Come on, you wallflowers.
We have one pretty good question online just came in.
And then we'll wrap up soon too, guys, because we do need to get to Carlos Morales.
It looks like it's for Jake. If 75% of miners want inflation, do you think they should be allowed to change the rules?
I think the miners could fork themselves off, and I don't think any users would go along with them if they wanted that.
You could ask the same thing about Bitcoin.
About unlimited, that's pretty much what happened,
well,
right?
I think if there's
with the header first block mining.
Again, I think that if a significant enough majority of people wants their 1 megabyte Bitcoin to persist, that they should have every right to do so.
So I can guarantee you that they will.
Okay, good.
I can guarantee you that.
They should.
Because I know I'm staying
Why
on
shouldn't
it.
they?
I can guarantee you that they will.
I fully support your right to use whatever cryptocurrency you would like to.
Jake, if you are the last person who believes in Bitcoin Unlimited, will you maintain that node?
I believe that a cryptocurrency has value, or any currency, because of its network of users.
Tone, what do you?
I would not be one person using a currency.
What are you worried about if the block size was increased to 2 megabytes? What specifically are you
worried about? The moral hazard of 2 Bitcoins and losing confidence in Bitcoin. But more importantly, what worries me...
Why would there be confidence lost?
What worries me the most is that the core developers who I trust with development, because my development days are long behind me, I believe they're the smartest people to solve these problems. And if they give in to the hard fork, which they know is dangerous, they will not be doing their fiduciary duty to make the Bitcoin the most optimal protocol. They will lose my faith in their ability to do their job. And if they don't get SegWit in and they lose this battle, I believe the smartest people in the room will leave.
What if they change their mind?
They won't, because it goes against their beliefs of being the developers in Bitcoin. I think that, in my mind, that's already established.
But what if somebody came up with a BIP that said, okay, whatever your concerns are with, you don't really have concerns about the 2 megabyte block. Your concern is that other people are concerned.
If they approve a BIP because they think it's technically sound and not to meet in the middle, I will trust their decision.
Fundamentally, we're dealing with a protocol. If politics are driving a protocol change or a protocol evolution, we have a problem. And fundamentally, that is a characterization in Bitcoin that mandates that changes that are not backwards compatible disenfranchise previous or earlier adopter Bitcoins necessarily at the cost of current Bitcoiners.
Johnny, do you think that?
I guess, Bruce, like a way I'd kind of answer that is, like when I've got a medical issue, I'll go to a doctor. And if I don't necessarily like his diagnosis or feel something odd about it, I might go to like another doctor or maybe even like a third doctor so I get a third opinion, But at the end of the day, it's still my decision on what I do with regard to like my healthcare, right? And it's the same with like my financial healthcare. And I realize that doctors get paid for how many surgeries they do. Like there's this economic bias, and nobody cares about my wealth or my health as much as I do.
Obama does.
And so, yeah, Obama does. And so it comes down to like each individual. And in Bitcoin, that comes down to which, whether individuals what full nodes they're running. And so maybe that's what has to happen is people have to like learn by losing $30 or $50 million as a community who to trust, and also be an example of who not to trust.
Hey, Trace, can I just follow up on that? Just a question for you. If you have a doctor that you trusted up to this point, but you want to get a second opinion, and you happen to get that second opinion from another doctor whose suggestion is to cure you, they have to bleed you, would you want your doctor to then compromise somewhere in the middle?
Well, I mean, like, to use that analogy with the doctor, they've got very specialized technical knowledge in a particular area. Knowledge that I don't personally have. So we've got like what Hayek got the Nobel Prize for, right? And so like I don't necessarily know whether I can assess the argument on both sides, but I still have to make the decision. And so, I go to multiple doctors, but if I and I always try to go to the best doctor I can possibly find on the subject. Like the doctor that did my LASIK did Tiger Woods' LASIK because like I'm not gonna like take a chance with a mediocre doctor, right? And so, but if I've got 9, if I've got 100, if I've got 100,
I couldn't afford that doctor. I took a chance.
Yeah, I mean, if I've got 115 world-recognized doctors that have like long CVs and have done tremendous things, and then I've got like 4 or 5 like nurses that aren't even doctors, right? They're just nurses, and they haven't actually done anything. Like, yeah, I'm going to side with the 115.
Thanks, Bruce.
That have reputations and have done work.
That's a bit of an appeal to an authority. I mean, doctors actually did used to believe in bloodletting, and they did not like washing their hands.
Actually, in some cases,
experts can be incorrect.
even saved you because bacteria love iron. So actually bleeding you ended up.
But those doctors have been pretty much removed from the system by more competent doctors.
Well, maybe that's happening in Bitcoin right now.
And my analogy has been in a game of Survivor, the weakest people get removed, which is why I don't believe Gavin Andreessen and Mike Hearn are there anymore.
Wow.
The weakest people get removed first, but then you come to a point where the mediocre people want to get rid of the strong people to have a chance.
I think that's incredibly disrespectful to guys that contributed a lot to Bitcoin Tone.
No, it's not disrespectful because
It's very disrespectful.
In the beginning they were the best people for the job until more competent developers just happened to get interested in the protocol.
Yeah, I mean,
it's the way it is.
It just gets more competitive.
One point I'd also like to make is that
the skill set need does evolve in Bitcoin. It has evolved in Bitcoin. The characteristics required of someone who's going to be able to meaningfully contribute are different than they were at the initial start of the protocol.
One point I'd like to make is that you guys are all talking about SegWit as though it were a given. SegWit is actually the more radical departure from what the Bitcoin protocol looks like compared to a simple block size increase.
Well, elaborate on that.
Why
Just
would
to
you
make an
say
assertion.
that? It creates new transaction formats. As coded by Core and its soft fork, it incentivizes certain transactions by doing a fee discount.
Do you use CSV? Do you use check lock time verified? Do you use any of the, do you use P2SH? Do you use multisig in Bitcoin today?
No, not really.
Okay, well, I know people who do. So
I have.
Yeah, I mean, I bet you
I'm not opposed to new features. I'm just saying if you're holding SegWit up as a scaling solution, realize that that's a far more drastic change than a simple block size increase.
I mean, payment channels were proposed as a possible methodology of scaling the system by both Hal Finney and Satoshi. So I'm not really sure.
I'm also not anti-payment channel.
Yeah.
All right, we have another.
Just a quick comment from online. People in the chat would prefer Tiger Woods' LASIK doctor to replace the Bitcoin Unlimited developers. I'm just reading.
I want Tiger Woods' VD doctor. Am I right? Am I right? Okay.
He keeps changing his stance, so I don't know.
Nice.
I just get one last hypothetical question, maybe. If somebody would come along, recode the things Bitcoin Unlimited does as a soft fork, would you support that, or do you definitely want to have a hard fork?
I actually prefer the moral clarity of a hard fork. It forces a vote one way or another. A soft fork drags users along whether they want to be part of that or not.
Okay, thank you.
But your system that you're proposing empowers the miners to do all future things.
No, it doesn't. If I'm a user that is adamantly opposed to blocks above a certain size, I can set in my BU settings I will never accept blocks above a certain size. or I can reluctantly go along with the majority of the network, because that's what gives a currency value.
Now we're at a agreed fixed size. So you have to recognize that there is a characteristic of this change to the system whereby miners are further empowered, especially miners amongst themselves in comparison to small miners.
I don't think it's giving them any powers they don't already have. Miners can already add into their own core binaries that they want 2 megabyte blocks. It simply adds a communication mechanism.
I know we're finishing up, but a quick question, because I feel it's important. Does Bitcoin Unlimited have a roadmap? Well, a question just came in.
I'm not sure about that. I can look into that.
I'm not sure they have developers.
They definitely have developers.
I mean, why wouldn't those developers be working on core? I mean,
several of them tried to, and
were they just not good enough?
No, they weren't cool enough to be part of Core's clique, basically.
Well, I mean, Core is like a meritocracy. It doesn't
That's
care.
not how Core works, Jake. And I'm not even part of
how
Core.
Core works.
Okay, so may I ask a question here? Yeah. So this is obviously one of the contentions here. Is how do we recognize or define an aggression against the consensus system, right? An alternative, what is the valid path to influence and upgrade the system, right?
Whatever Core
you
says it
characterize Jake, you're Jake, you're John, right?
Yeah.
So John characterized Jake's sort of MBU sort of approach as aggressive and hostile, and you disagree, right? So there's clear disagreement here.
By not supporting backwards compatibility, it's explicitly hostile to Bitcoiners in the past who opted into a certain rule set, and as a result, are being forced to adopt a new rule set.
What if past users so okay, you just defined it, great. Is there a mechanism for past users to upgrade that contract?
Well, in the case of the invalid, in the case of the invalid BU block, they just ban all the peers that forward them an invalid block.
Johnny, these users in the past, if they are so adamantly opposed to the network that whatever economic majority is on, they can keep running their own fork with their 0.7
Yes,
node
I just think we fundamentally have a different characterization of what it means to be a Bitcoiner. Like the compulsion you have of forcing people into your new rule set
My
is actually
compulsion is
problematic.
I am actually not force-based at all. I'm coming from a completely voluntary perspective.
But by eliminating backwards compatibility, that's objectively false.
A user who would then want to join the network can simply upgrade their node software.
Well, so in the context of the fact that if you manage to, for example, politically persuade the majority of miners, as you defined by 51% of miners, to attack the original chain and progress this new version of Bitcoin,
is it only an attack if you don't like it?
No, it's an attack specifically because it is hostile to backwards compatibility.
That's a new one. I haven't heard that one.
So I think personally, I personally would only be comfortable with the hard fork under conditions where it solves specific security characteristics or security holes in Bitcoin, or if you have unilateral or almost unilateral consensus. So otherwise, you're explicitly disempowering the choices someone made in the past to opt into Bitcoin with a specific rule set and stating that
I think that by trying to prevent anything else, you are forcing everyone else into this 1 megabyte.
Okay, so
Bitcoin
are you? Is this new chain an altcoin then?
Which new chain?
The one that you're moving on and upgrading the consensus rules on.
I think the economic majority exchanges, miners, etc., will define which chain is called Bitcoin.
All right, so let's say it splits evenly, half and half. What's the characteristics?
Then that would be an interesting battle.
I know, but is the chain in which spliced away from the original rule set the one that people 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago opted into? Is this new chain that has new rules? But in this case, it's larger than 1 megabyte block sizes. In other cases, it's 1% inflation. Is that new chain an altcoin?
I don't think that's easy to define. I think leave that up to the market.
Why not just hurry and do it?
I think the idea is that you want to wait for a majority of hash rate.
I mean, we've had like XT and we've had Classic. Like, why not just hurry up and do it?
Well, there've been a lot of efforts to stifle those. So,
what do you mean? The miners
the rampant
can just do
censorship
it, right?
online. Yes, the miners can do it.
Why not? I mean, if it's so much better, like, why not just do it?
They are actively looking into that, and I would say that's why Bitcoin Unlimited is now 20% of the network.
As they're actively looking into it, I mean, January 1st, the Bitcoin community was paying $80,000 a day in fees. Now they're paying $200,000 a day in fees.
Do you not see that as a problem?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like if Bitcoin Unlimited's the solution, then like why not just do it?
So I was actually just in China last week and meeting with some of the miners, and I'm trying to emphasize to them why I think this is so urgent that fees are spiraling out of control like this.
Well, but they like it. I mean, they benefit from it. They actually would prefer that nothing happened because then those fees keep going up.
That's incorrect. So the miners, they definitely understand the sort of long-term incentives at play with Bitcoin.
Yeah,
but they are certainly enjoying the additional revenue.
Or they get money in
right
their
now.
hand right now. Like, I mean, like the miners, I mean, they actually would prefer that they continue being able to tax the Bitcoin community.
That's nice while they have it now, but they're not going to kill Bitcoin to maintain that forever.
I'm not saying that they would kill Bitcoin or anything, but
they will kill Bitcoin if transaction fees continue going up.
No, I mean,
I wouldn't say that's necessarily true.
Trace, Clark Moody here.
Yeah.
Why are they mining 1 megabyte blocks now and not 100 kilobyte blocks if they care about maximizing fees?
I'm not sure that like 100 kilobyte blocks would increase the transaction fees that get paid.
Why not?
1/10 the supply.
Like, I'm not a miner. I don't really know, but I've seen small blocks. Not every block is full. I've seen smaller blocks come through the network.
But that's for orphan rate. I mean, you'd think that a miner would want to put as many transactions as they can into the block that have transaction fees attached to them.
And they generally do.
Which is what they do.
Minus empty blocks.
Andrew Stone from Bitcoin Unlimited actually published a great paper on the empty block thing, the one transaction block. I recommend you check it out.
But like, I mean, it just makes me wonder, like, where's the Bitcoin community gonna, like, I mean, is $1 million a day of transaction fees, or do like, because I mean,
I think what's more important to look at is the cost per transaction, not the total.
Well, yeah, but SegWit, for example, would decrease the cost per transaction and increase the capacity in the blocks. So, like, that would have an immediate decrease probably in fees
it only
paid,
decreases
but it would increase fees paid in the medium term.
It decreases the cost of a SegWit transaction relative to existing transactions. What happens when those get all full?
Yeah, so I mean, is
then
that
you get rising fee pressure?
Like, is this why the miners don't necessarily like SegWit then? Is because they like collecting $200,000 a day of fees?
Wait a minute, Jake. I think Core made it clear that in that situation, if they see that a hard fork now becomes fairly safe, they would be for it. They just don't think it's safe now.
That's actually the impression I get from the miners, is that they value not splitting the chain above all else.
Yeah, well, at this current point in time, in a future point in time, if there is a situation where a hard fork becomes significantly safer and necessary, I have full faith in core developers that would be the direction they go, and I would want them to go in that direction. But right now, I trust their judgment that it's not safe to do so.
You guys have me for 5 more minutes, Will.
Yeah, we should probably wrap this up, huh?
Yeah.
Long show.
Very long show.
Yeah, we had 100 live viewers, so that's great.
There were thousands on here, on Facebook, across 14 different shares.
Huh.
All right.
Well, nice debating you all.
Yeah.
Just a conversation.
All right, and that'll end the circle jerk here.
Oh, good God. So many Bitcoiners just talking about Bitcoin. Jeez.
Thanks for having us.
We're still streaming live, sort of, on my end, but not recording. I'm going to try and get the video. I'm going to try and post it on either my YouTube channel